Chapter 1. There was a sudden bang, and a blue-gray owl hit the door of a wooden house on the farm. Why the hell are there so many owls all of a sudden? Oh dear. Maybe it's because you're so pretty and they want to come and say hello. Go and wake up Richard. Isn't he going to see the pony? Okay. Dear, speaking of which, a white woman with blonde hair full of femininity stood up and walked to the second floor of the wooden house. Mom, I'm up and I'm going down right away. The person who spoke was a young lady about 10 years old, with black hair, fair complexion, delicate facial features, and deep blue eyes revealing a hint of maturity beyond her age. Richard was originally an ordinary office worker in China. He lived a happy life from 5 to 9. Occasionally, when he had no project tasks, he sneaked fish to read online articles. When he returned to the rental house after working overtime, he didn't know is it dazzled or what. Seeing a human-like thing disappearing by the side of the road, he walked to the middle of the road in a daze and had a close contact with a muck truck. Then, in the process of ignorance, when I wake up again, I have become a foreign baby. I don't have to worry about the language problem. I just learn it slowly anyway, and I don't know if it's a coincidence or fate. Richard is still called Richard. Originally surnamed Li Mingxia, now called Richard Harris, father Wilson Harris, mother Olivia Harris. Richard was very excited at the beginning. After all, according to the routines of the internet, the strongest professions are celestial traveler, Indian motorcyclist, and American homeless. In his longing, Richard summoned his own system countless times. But it was a pity that he summoned lonely, and there was no movement. Only when he was 5 years old, he fell down on the second floor. There was a stone underneath, but it suddenly turned into a sponge. This made Richard excited for a long time, thinking that he had triggered some special ability. When he tried again, he ended up staying in the hospital for half a year. This made the restless Richard completely lie flat, destroy it, honestly inherit his father's farm, and continue farming abroad. Fortunately, the degree of mechanization here is relatively high, and there are a few employees, so he doesn't have to work by himself, and because the family they have been farmers for generations. Although they are not local tyrants, they are still rich in assets. At least they will not worry about dying for a few lifetimes. Following the memory, Richard came down from his bedroom and walked into the living room. Honey, hurry up and eat. Okay, Mom. Richard looked at the food on the table with a distressed expression. Although it has been 11 years since he came to this world, the food here really can't satisfy the stomach of a person from the Celestial Dynasty, but if you do it, let's not say that you don't have a lot of seasonings, and secondly, how can you, a native British, know these things? I'm afraid they will be sliced and studied. After struggling to finish the baked beans and tomato sauce, Richard quickly wiped his mouth. Dad, does Bowley still need milk? I want to feed him the first grass. Bowley is a filly. It was born about half a year ago, and Richard has been taking care of it. It's okay. It's okay for today. We'll go there together after I finish eating. Okay. Dad, by the way, are there any owls here today? Yes, it's really weird. A strange feeling rose from Richard's heart. The owl seemed very familiar, but he couldn't remember it. Forget it. Let's forget about it. He went to look at the pony handle first, stood up while thinking. Richard put on his coat and walked out house, waiting for Dad to come out at the door. After a while, Wilson came out and led Richard to the stable, where 2 workers were pouring hay into the stable. Wait a minute, I want to feed Bowley. Good morning, Mr. Wilson. Don't worry about Richard. We'll keep it for you. One of the workers greeted the father and son with a smile. Advertisement, good morning. Bob, by the way, Harris. Later you will find out why there are so many owls. Okay, Mr. Wilson, responded another older worker. By the way, Mr. Wilson, when I went to deliver the milk in the morning, I saw some strange letters on the ground, which seemed to be brought by owls and put in your workshop. A letter from an owl? I don't know whose prank it was. Mr. Wilson responded. Owl? Letter? Could it be that, as if his brain had lost the ability to direct his own actions, Richard stood there motionless like a log, staring at Bowley, who was licking his hand with blank eyes. Father, let's go and see what the letter is. Responding, Richard abandoned the dazed Bowley and rushed over to drag Wilson to the workshop. Don't worry, son. It's just a prank. After all, no normal person sends letters with an owl. Pulled by Richard, the father and son entered the workshop. There were 4 or 5 identical letters on the table. The envelopes were written in emerald green ink. Harris Farm, Stable Workshop, Mr. Richard Harris. Richard turned over the envelope and was about to open it. On the back was a very familiar symbol from his previous life, a coat of arms. A capital H surrounded by 4 animals: lion, snake, eagle, badger. Ha! Profit. Wave. Special. Richard's excited fingers kept trembling. As a senior online fan in his previous life, although he hadn't read the original novel, he had read a lot of fanfiction on Feilu. He also had a second-grade illness for a while and bought online an elder wand that shoots fireballs. At this time, the white bee has no nose. A series of images flashed across my mind. Seeing Richard, who was stunned, Wilson picked up another letter from the table. Parchment? He was taken aback for a moment. He didn't care about pranks. Open the envelope and take out the letter paper, which is still written in emerald green ink. Headmaster Albus Dumbledore, President of the International Federation of Wizards, First Class Merlin, Great Magician, Chief Magician of the Wisengamot, dear Mr. Harris. We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to study at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Enclosed is a list of required secretaries and equipment. Semester is scheduled to start on September 1st. We will wait for your owl to bring your reply before July 31st. Considering your family factors, we will arrange for the professor to visit your family at 12 o'clock today. Vice Principal, female, sincerely, Minerva McGonagall. The second page Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry uniform first-year students need. Advertisement 1. 3-sided plain work gown, black, 2. A plain peaked hat for daytime wear, black, 3. A pair of protective gloves, made of dragon skin or similar material, 4. A winter cloak, black with silver buckle. Please note, all student attire must have a name tag. Textbook. All students need to prepare the following books. Standard Spells, Beginners, by Miranda Goshawk. A History of Magic, by Bathilda Bagshot. A Theory of Magic, by Adby Wafflin. The Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, by Emmerich Switch. 1,000 Miraculous Herbs and Mushrooms, by Philida Spur. Magic Potions and Potions, by Arsene Geiger. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, by Newt Scamander. The Black Arts, A Guide to Self-Defense, by Quentin Trimble. Other Equipment, a wand, a crucible, pewter, standard size number 2, a set of glass or crystal vials, a telescope, a brass balance. Students may bring an owl or a cat or a toad. Parents are especially reminded that first-year freshmen are not allowed to bring their own broomsticks. Chapter 2. The First Close Contact with Magic. This is absolutely a lie. What magic, Olivia? I will never agree to let my son go to this so-called magic school. Of course, dear, I don't agree. It's just that, Richard. I want to learn magic. How cool is this? I want to learn. Of course, Richard knew that his parents would definitely not agree, so he was just delaying the time until the professor came, and the professor would naturally show magic and get his parents to agree. Okay, dear, didn't the letter say that a professor would come, and you'll know if it's a liar if you read it then? Olivia comforted the father and son. With the ticking sound of the clock, the time came to 12 o'clock unknowingly. Richard, who kept looking at the clock, called excitedly, Dad, Mom, come quickly. It's 12 o'clock. The professor is coming soon. Honey, I bet no one will come. It's just a prank. Before he finished speaking, there was a knock on the door. Just as Richard was about to open the door, he was hugged by Mrs. Olivia, while Mr. Wilson picked up the shotgun and walked cautiously towards the door. Bring Richard inside. I want to see what liar is so bold and dares to come to the door. As he spoke, he slowly opened the door, and there was a bald man standing at the door, with white hair on the temples and a huge beard, but he was a bit short, only half the height of an adult, even taller than the 11-year-old Richard, much shorter. Are disabled people used as liars now? Wilson held the shotgun in embarrassment, as if an adult was bullying a child. Mr. Harris, first of all, please put down the iron pipe in your hand. Although this is not a threat to me, it is not a friendly gesture. After all, I will be your child's teacher. Secondly, I am not disabled. Because of my race, I can only grow so tall. Still talking, the shotgun in Wilson's hand suddenly turned into a scarf, and Wilson was also taken aback and quickly threw the scarf away. Although my transfiguration is not as good as Professor McGonagall, she is the professor of transfiguration after all. By the way, my name is Phileas Flitwick. You can also call me Professor Flitwick. I will teach charms. Then, Professor Flitwick bypassed Wilson and walked in, and said to Richard, You are Mr. Harris, hello? I believe you have read the admission letter. It should have mentioned in the letter that I will visit today. The time is just right. You are not late. At this time, Wilson, who had just reacted, rushed to Olivia with a brisk walk. It's amazing, dear. Have you seen it? There is really magic. Olivia also said to Professor Flitwick excitedly, I'm very sorry for the behavior just now, but can I trouble you to perform again? Advertisement, of course, Mrs. Harris. As Flitwick pointed his wand at the teapot on the table, the teapot slowly stood up, walked up to Olivia with graceful steps, and danced for a while. Tap dancing, then returned to the original position, filled the 4 cups with tea, and the 4 cups flew towards several people in the house. After these things, the Harris couple finally believed in the existence of magic, and they came to the living room to sit down. Is this magic? It's amazing. Will Richard be able to do this in the future? Yes, Mrs. Harris. As long as you graduate from school, you can become an excellent wizard, Professor Flitwick replied. Then is there any danger in learning magic? Wilson asked cautiously. After all, their family has a lot of money, so there is no need to put themselves in danger. Hogwarts is the best magic school in Europe. Principal Dumbledore is also the greatest wizard in the world. Learning magic will not put your life in danger. At the same time, if the magic power is activated and you don't learn how to cast spells properly, you may become if you become silent, it will affect your life. Richard, what's your decision? Wilson looked at Richard. Dad, I hope to learn magic. After all, what a magical world this is. What do you say, Olivia? Richard is already a big kid, and we should respect his choice. Okay, I agree too. Professor Flitwick, we agree to let Richard learn magic, but where can I buy the things and books mentioned in the letter? There are other parents waiting for me to go today. I will take you and another student to buy by next Wednesday. Please prepare in advance. Okay, let's stop here today. I will go first, Flitwick said with the voice. The professor disappeared in front of everyone. This is really amazing, Olivia said with sparkling eyes. And Mr. Wilson looked at the scarf on the ground and was about to say something, but Professor Flitwick, who suddenly disappeared, was also stuck. Not far away, Flitwick suddenly felt as if he had forgotten something. Forget it. It shouldn't be something important. Let's go to the next one first. Don't be late. Advertisement at night. Richard was lying on the bed excitedly. His mind kept running through various plots about Harry Potter in his previous life, and suddenly remembered that there seemed to be a magic in the wizarding world called insanity. If someone used it on him, it seemed that Snape would very good at it. At this moment, a sudden ding sounded in Richard's head. In an instant, Richard became unconscious. In his mind, Richard's consciousness gradually became clear. A vague human-shaped figure came from a distance. This is so familiar. Why can't I remember it? Suddenly, Richard realized that this was the shadow he had seen in his previous life. And it was because of this shadow that Richard had a car accident and was reborn here. Hello, human. The shadow suddenly said that it was alive. Although it was already in front of him, for some reason Richard couldn't see clearly. He could only feel that it was a shadow. Just as he was about to take a closer look, the shadow said again, "Don't look any further. We are creatures of different dimensions. You shouldn't be able to see us. In your previous life, you accidentally saw us because of a space-time rift. Then why am I reborn here?" Richard asked, puzzled. "This is our compensation to you. We are observers of the universe. We can only observe and record the universe. We must not interfere. And because we caused your death, we compensate you. This is the derived world of human beings on Earth. So put it here, and you are not satisfied with the original world. Then I want to go back to the original world. I'm sorry, this is not possible. We have altered the memory of all of you, including your parents. They will no longer know you. But as part of the compensation, we gave them a lot of money in the form of a lottery and fine-tuned their bodies so they can live long and healthy lives. Then will there be people from other worlds here?" As a former netizen, Dumbledore is not forgiven. No, we should block this derivative world in all dimensions. There will only be you as a traverser here, and as a bonus, you will be given a newly created system. This system cannot be opened yet. You need to scan the world and then automatically generate a system that suits you in this world. Of course, we will not interfere with your choice, so it will only be turned on after you choose whether to enter the wizarding world. If you do not enter the wizarding world, this system will automatically put the wizarding world is completely sealed. It won't be in the world where you appear. Well, you should be satisfied now. I'm leaving. Don't go. Are there any other benefits? Although this is a derivative world, we can't interfere too much. How about this? I'll give you another nano memory. Although this world also has similar magic, the effect of this one is more significant. It will stick to your mind. It not only helps you store memories, but also puts real objects in it so that no one will find it, and it can also protect your brain from being peeped by others. But there is a limitation that living things cannot be put in. The specific function requires you experience it yourself. Before he could finish speaking, the shadow had disappeared, and Richard slowly fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 3. Early the next morning, Richard slowly woke up as the sunlight poured into the room through the window. It turned out to be a dream, but it's so real. As Richard talked to himself, he was about to get out of bed and change his clothes. Just as he was about to get his coat, he saw the coat flying over by itself. "Aren't you awake yet?" Richard asked in confusion. Suddenly he remembered the dream from last night. Could it be true? Thinking of this, Richard stood up, looked at the pillow on the bed, thought about putting the pillow away, and the pillow disappeared in an instant, and then thought about the pillow, and the pillow appeared on the bed again. It was real, not a dream. And then Richard was out of control as if he had discovered a new world. From the bed to the wardrobe, everything in the room was put in and taken out. Try how many things you can put in when you have time, but according to the aliens, at least now you don't have to worry about others being able to see my memory. I didn't expect the biggest crisis to be resolved like this. Richard continued to try while thinking it was unexpectedly simple to let everything in the room float. Just when he was about to try to see if he could float himself, Olivia's voice came from downstairs. "Richard, get up and eat." "Okay, Mommy will go down now." After the family finished breakfast, Richard went to feed the pony with his father, as if everything was the same as usual, but seeing his mother's slightly worried eyes occasionally, everything was different again. In Richard's anticipation, it finally came on Wednesday. Richard packed himself early in the morning. Mr. Wilson went to the bank to withdraw £10,000 and took 5 kilograms of gold from the safe at home. After all, he didn't know what could be exchanged for money. It doesn't matter if you bring more. Then the family sat in the living room and waited for the professor to come. At 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang, and Richard's family came out immediately and saw a couple and their 2 children. Oh no, it was Professor Flitwick and another family. "Dr. Granger?" Wilson looked at the man in front of him suspiciously. "Mr. Harris?" Granger was also obviously surprised, and after saying that, the 2 men looked at their own child, then at the other's child, and then laughed. "Come here, Richard. Do you see who this is? Uncle and Aunt Granger, hello. Hermione, hello. Hello, Richard. I didn't expect that you were also a little wizard. So you don't have to worry about Hermione getting used to it at school." Granger laughed. "Advertisement, okay, sir. It's getting late now. Let's go," Professor Flitwick said. The group got into the car of Granger's family and drove towards the city. After a while, the group came to the bookstore. "Is it right here? In a bookstore?" "No, Mr. Granger, it's next to him, the leaky cauldron, but you shouldn't be able to see the muggle-repelling curse being cast. The 2 little wizards should be able to." Speaking of that, Professor Flitwick opened the door and walked in, and the 4 adults were dragged in by Richard and Hermione. Inside it's a standard, well, dark and dirty bar, but it's filled with people in fancy dress. "Hello, Professor Flitwick. Are these freshmen this year?" A boss-like person greeted Professor Flitwick. "Yes, Tom," said Professor Flitwick, leading them through the cluttered hall, opening a small door into a courtyard surrounded by walls, and B************* G on the wall. "Look at my actions, children. You will need this later. Count 3 pieces up on the trash can, 2 pieces horizontally, and hit 3 times with the wand." At this time, the wall in front of him began to shake, and a small hole appeared in the middle, and the hole gradually became bigger and bigger until a passage was reached. "Welcome to Diagon Alley," said Professor Flitwick. "Come on. This is the world of magic. You can explore the rest by yourself. I suggest you go to Gringotts to exchange some galleons first, and then buy things according to the book list." "Goodbye," Flitwick said. The professor went back to the leaky cauldron at this time. Both the Harris couple and the Granger family were shocked by the scene in front of them. Only Richard, who had seen a movie in his previous life, felt shocked but held it. Diagon Alley is very similar to the tourist district in Richard's previous life. It is full of people, and both sides of the path are densely packed with shops and all kinds of magical supplies. "Come on, Dad. Let's change the money first," Richard urged. "Okay. What is it called? Gringotts?" "Yes, it is Gringotts." Advertisement. A group of people passed through the dry pot shop, magic pet shop, flying broomstick shop, and arrived at the gate of Gringotts. Gringotts is the only bank in the wizarding world. It was established and managed by goblins. It is said that it was because of the failure of the Goblin Uprising. Well, Richard doesn't want to complain about it. The failure to manage the financial system is very wizard, brain dead. It has a tall white building and a bronze gate, from which a second door appeared in front of them, silver, with the following inscriptions engraved on it. "Come in, stranger, but beware what will be the end of being greedy, blindly taking, and getting something for nothing, will be punished most severely. So if you want to take a piece of wealth that never belonged to you from our underground vault, thief, you have been warned, beware of recruits, not a treasure, but a bad reward. We need to exchange some for some money, the money used by wizards, Wilson said to the goblin inside the counter. 1 gold galleon equals 5 pounds. 1 gold galleon equals 17 silver sickles. 1 silver sickle equals 29 copper nats, which can only be exchanged for 100 pounds a year. After all, those papers have no meaning to us. After glancing at Richard and Hermione, he continued to speak impatiently. Hogwarts freshmen can exchange 200 pounds for the first year. You have to check the notice. After Richard and Hermione handed over the notice to the goblin for inspection, the two families exchanged 200 pounds for galleons. Richard asked, "Can gold be exchanged?" "Of course, 1 g of gold can be exchanged for 8 gold galleons. There is no upper limit." "This honorable gentleman, how much do you want to exchange?" Hearing that Richard wanted to exchange gold, the goblin's eyes lit up, and her tone became much more respectful in an instant. 2 kilograms of gold, Wilson said. "Okay, sir, please wait a moment. 2 kilograms of gold can be exchanged for 16,000 galleons. We will give you a non-traceable extension wallet for free. Do you have any plans to open a personal warehouse in Gringotts? We are the world's most safe place." "No need." Richard immediately refused. After all, there is a nano-storage, and there is no such security anywhere. Besides, according to the plot, Gringotts will be invaded by a boy with a nose and a bateau. While talking, several goblins had already brought the galleons over with a cart and put a full 16,000 galleons into the purse under Olivia's supervision. Chapter 4 Shopping. Coming out of Gringotts, Wilson said to the Grangers, "Should we go to a bar for a drink and let the 2 children go shopping? After all, they will go to school by themselves soon. This is also an exercise." "Yes, Hermione, go yourselves," Mr. Granger agreed. "Okay, then let's go first. Goodbye, Dad and Mom. Goodbye, Uncle and Aunt Granger." After speaking, Richard and Hermione walked to the depths of Diagon Alley. "Where do we go first? Do we go get the wand first?" "Yes, definitely the wand first, then the books. Oh my God, it's amazing here. And that Professor McGonagall who came to our house turned into a cat? Can the professor at your house change? Am I really a wizard? Is it difficult to learn wizards? Do dragons really exist in the world?" Richard saw that leaving his parents was like breaking the seal. Hermione, who had been chattering all the time, couldn't help but imagine 500 ducks quacking, just perfunctory Hermione. After all, she didn't need anyone to say anything, as long as someone just listened. While the two were talking, they came to Ollivander's wand shop. The peeled gold signboard read, "Ollivander, excellent wand since 382 BC. A wand stood alone on a faded purple upholstery in a dusty window. After pushing the door and entering, I found that the store is very small. Except for a bench, there is nothing else. Thousands of long, narrow cardboard boxes containing wands were piled up to the ceiling in the small shop, and the shop was full of dust." "Good afternoon." A soft voice sounded, and Ollivander walked down the ladder slowly. "Welcome, fresh blood of the wizarding world. How do you know we're—" Hermione was interrupted by Ollivander before she could finish her sentence. "Yes, I remember every wand I've ever sold. Which one of you comes first? Lady first?" "That's right, ladies first. Hermione, you go first." "Okay, Hermione, what's your dominant hand?" "Right hand." "Stretch out your right arm, like this," said Ollivander, demonstrating, then took out a ruler and measured from Hermione's shoulder to fingertips and from wrist to elbow. Then he turned around and pulled out one of the many boxes. Advertisement Vine Wood, a length of dragon's nerve, 9 3/4. Give it a try. Hermione waved her wand lightly, and a gust of wind flew up. "That's it," Ollivander said immediately. "The next gentleman is your turn. Richard Harris. You can call me Richard." "Okay, Richard." After a series of measurements, Ollivander drew a box behind him. Halnut, unicorn hair, 11 inches. After Richard took it, he waved it lightly, and instantly a row of boxes fell down in front of him. "No, try this again." Ollivander took out another wand. Hawthorn, phoenix feather, 14 inches. Richard took the wand before he could even wave it, and Ollivander took it back, and it wasn't this one either. After tossing back and forth several times like this, there was still no suitable wand, and Ollivander was not impatient at all, but gradually became excited as if his fighting spirit had been aroused. Richard suddenly thought of not using his mental power to detect it. Thinking of it, he quietly stimulated his mental power and scanned towards the wand. At this time, all the wands began to shake non-stop, and suddenly a wand flew into Richard's hand from the deepest point. On the next day, Richard seemed to be uncontrollable and waved his wand. At this moment, all the wands stopped shaking, and the wand in Richard's hand emitted a white light that enveloped Richard. "This is it," Ollivander yelled excitedly, looked at the wand and introduced, "Thunderbolt Peachwood, the heartstrings of an unknown Chinese magical animal. My God, how could it be this one? It really is the wand that chooses the owner. Congratulations on finding a wand that suits you. The lady's wand is 7 galleons, and this gentleman's is 12 galleons. Neither the lightning strike wood nor the unknown heartstring can be found here, so the price is a little higher." Seeing the figures of the two leaving, Ollivander silently stared at Richard's back and muttered to himself for a while, then picked up a pen and paper and began to write, "Hi Dumbledore, I think you should know." After the two came out of the wand shop, they purchased the crucible, vial, telescope, and brass balance according to the list, and then went to Lehan bookstore with great interest. In addition to purchasing textbooks for school, Richard spent another nearly 500 galleons, bought a copy of all popular science books. This made Hermione envious, staring at Richard with big bowling eyes, and Richard had to promise to lend it to Hermione after reading it, and told Hermione at the same time. Advertisement: here are some basic books. The really important books are in Hogwarts. I heard that the school library has the most extensive books in the entire wizarding world, and many of them are orphans. Hermione was full of longing for the school when she heard this. Because there were too many books to buy, the staff of the bookstore sent them to the Leaky Cauldron first. Then Richard pulled Hermione excitedly towards Wonder Zoo. Just getting into magic, Hermione doesn't plan to keep pets. She still has to study first and then talk about it later, and Richard has nano-memory storage and understanding of the world of Harry Potter. So she doesn't worry about learning at all. Let's talk about it with Richard's spirit now. It is too easy to learn magic. When we arrived at the Magic Zoo, although there were many people outside, there were not many people in the store. A lady wearing thick, black-rimmed glasses came over. "Young man, hello, what do you need?" "I want to have a pet that can deliver letters, but owls really don't like it very much. Do you have any recommendations here?" "I happen to have a raven here. You can take a look. It's very smart and can talk, but the price is a bit high. After all, someone else put it here." "Okay, let me take a look first." As Richard walked towards the cage covered in black cloth, the raven stood proudly inside. Its beak was large and slightly curved, and its wedge-shaped tail was clearly layered. The whole body is dark and bright feathers. Instantly Richard was attracted by its temperament. "How many galleons?" This costs 10 galleons, although it's a bit expensive, but I want it." Before finishing speaking, Richard interrupted. 10 galleons must be expensive, but he really likes this raven so much that he wants to take it. After paying the money, just as she was about to leave, she saw Hermione stroking a ginger cat, whose fur was quite splendid. It had a flat face, as if it had rushed headlong into the wall at some point, and a fat tail that blew up like a bottle brush. "Crookshanks," Richard thought silently. "Do you like this cat very much? Do you want to buy it?" "I like it very much, but I still don't plan to keep a pet in the first grade. I'll buy it next year if it's still there." After speaking, Hermione reluctantly walked out of the store with Richard. All the things that should be bought have been bought, and after walking so much in a day, both of them were tired, so they went back to the Leaky Cauldron, and Mr. Granger drove the Harris family back to the farm. Chapter 5. After returning from Diagon Alley, Richard's life began to become more rhythmic. Every morning, he looked at the textbook and practiced magic spells. After entering school, minors are not allowed to use magic outside the school, but the period before entering school is a vacuum period. So Richard can practice magic unscrupulously. In the afternoon, I scan the books I bought from the bookstore. Yes, that is scanning. After all, Richard has the existence of nano-memory, which limits the speed of his reading in the future. As long as he reads it, it will naturally be recorded in the storage. Occasionally, I had a phone call with Hermione, chatting, of course, mainly because Hermione said that Richard also asked his father to bring a few recorded books to Hermione as agreed. I don't know if it was because of time travel, but Richard learned the spell very quickly, and half of the books he bought from the bookstore were scanned into the storage without knowing it. The time is also in a trance, and it is the day when Richard starts school early in the morning. Richard was woken up by his mother to sort out the things he had taken away. He prepared a lot of things, and only gave up some under his father's persuasion. Because his parents didn't understand magic, Richard pretended to put them all in. The traceless extended money bag was actually put into the nano storage. Because he spent a lot of time at home and happened to catch up with the traffic jam, Richard arrived at the station relatively late. Fortunately, he knew where platform 9 3/4 was, otherwise he didn't know if he could go to Hogwarts. When Richard passed the pillar between the 9 and 10 marks and came to platform 9 3/4, There were not many people on the platform. Richard hurriedly boarded the train. At this time, both the aisle and the carriages were full of students. Richard randomly found an empty carriage and got into it. At this time, the train slowly drove out of the platform. Before going to Hogwarts, Richard had made up his mind. Before the strength is not guaranteed, he can properly remind him, but he must not follow the protagonist. After all, he is not the savior. He is protected by Dumbledore, and the old bee is not like that in the novel and movie. Wei Guangxing, even in the novels and movies, the old bee doesn't necessarily love the other students except Harry Potter, and even Hermione was petrified in the 2nd grade. This is the protagonist trio. Thinking of Hermione, this little Lolita is a treasure girl in the world of Harry Potter, unlike Emma. Although the 3 views follow the 5 senses, but thinking about Emma's events a few years before he crossed, one has to sigh. The 5 senses are not disabled. The 3 views have disappeared. But even for Hermione, Richard didn't intend to stalk her like a licking dog. As a time traveler, with the blessing of a system, although I don't know what system it is yet, I'm afraid he won't be able to attract Hermione. Besides, apart from Hermione, there is no shortage of beauties in the Muggle world. Just when Richard was thinking wildly, the carriage door was opened. Who has ever seen a toad? Neville lost his pet. A familiar voice sounded from the door. Richard. Just thought of Hermione, but unexpectedly came here. Richard couldn't help curling his lips. Why don't you want to see me? I'm still worried why I didn't see you, Hermione said angrily when she saw Richard's expression. No, I was just wondering how so many people came to you. Richard nonsense without hesitation. That's good, by the way. Have you seen a toad? Advertisement, I haven't seen it, but Hermione, we are wizards now, and we should use the wizard's method to find things. What's your pet's name? Richard asked the little fat man following Hermione. Lifu, his name is Lifu. Neville responded quickly. After hearing the name, Richard took out his wand in the lining of his clothes, said Lifu is coming, and waved his wand at the same time. At this moment, a toad flew over from the corner of the bathroom not far away. Lifu. This is Lifu. Neville excitedly took the toad and kissed it. Seeing this, Richard felt nauseated. If he hadn't had a good impression of Neville, he wouldn't have cared about it. This is the flying curse. Hermione, who was a top student, recognized the spell at a glance. I don't know how to do it yet. Even Richard knows it, and I'm sure everyone else can too. I'm going to bring my luggage, Richard. You have to teach me. Before he finished speaking, the windy woman rushed out again. What do you mean even Richard can? Am I bad? After thanking Richard shyly, Neville also walked out. This is a poor child, and I can help him if I have a chance in the future. Looking at Neville's clumsy figure, Richard thought silently, then took out a book from the storage and continued to scan it. As time passed, the sky was gradually shrouded in darkness. The Hogwarts Express also gradually slowed down. We should be almost there, get ready. As Richard put the books he took out into the box, Hermione also stopped studying. When the train came to a complete stop, the little wizards also started to get off. Okay, we're here, get out of the car, the 1st graders go this way. A huge man appeared at the locomotive with a street lamp. When Richard walked up to the man, he heard the man saying hello to a little wizard. Hi, Harry. Hi, Hagrid. Harry Potter. Richard, who heard the voice, looked over there. A little wizard with dark hair, green eyes, and slightly below his age stood beside Hagrid. Advertisement, this is Harry Potter. The first time Richard met the child of destiny and savior of the original world. Of course it is Richard now. Can't help but look around. Thinking of the savior, he couldn't help thinking that he was the savior. After all, if he chose not to enter the wizarding world would disappear. Okay, 1st graders come here. Get on the boat this way. Hurry up and follow. Hagrid's loud voice started to shout again. For people in a boat, don't look around. Be careful of falling into the water, Hagrid said as he got into a boat. The ship must have sunk, Richard thought darkly, looking at the waterline of Hagrid's boat. Richard, Hermione, and Neville boarded a boat together, and soon a young wizard came up. After everyone boarded, the boat began to slide by itself. As the boat moved forward, a huge, brightly lit fort slowly appeared in front of Richard. Although he had seen it in a movie in his previous life, after seeing it in real life, Richard couldn't help but marvel together with the other little wizards. After going ashore with the crowd, everyone walked into the castle together. At this point, Professor McGonagall was already standing there. Welcome to Hogwarts. Later, you will enter the hall for the sorting ceremony. There are Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin. During the school period, the college is your home. We will add and subtract points. At the end of the year, The one with the highest score will win the college cup. Well, you guys wait here for a while. I'll go see if the layout is ready. After speaking, Professor McGonagall walked into the hall. Then came the first communication between Malfoy and Harry, the pair of CPs. But obviously Harry rejected Malfoy and chose his good friend Ronald. Richard, who understands the plot, knows that Malfoy has not given up and will continue to pester Harry persistently. "Yeah, Yuan, but I still wish you lovers to get married in the end." Richard inadvertently said, "What?" Hermione asked beside him, unable to hear clearly. "Nothing. Which college do you want to go to?" "I don't know, but I heard that Gryffindor is the best. Even Headmaster Dumbledore is from Gryffindor. How about you?" Just as Richard was about to say something, Professor McGonagall came out. "Everything is ready. Follow me." Professor McGonagall walked into the hall with all the little ones. Chapter 6. The group followed Professor McGonagall into the auditorium. There are 4 long tables running through the brightly lit auditorium, one for each college, and the auditorium seems to have no ceiling, and you can see the starry sky when you look up. Countless candles are suspended in midair, illuminating the entire auditorium, going all the way to the end of the auditorium. All the professors sat on another long table, facing all the students. A bench was placed in front of the professor's seat, and on the bench was a pointed wizard hat that was full of signs of time and was patched. "Everyone wait here first. Professor Dumbledore has a few words to say to everyone," Professor McGonagall said. At this time, in the middle of the professor's chair, a tall old wizard with snow-white hair and beard stood up. "I have a few notices for the start of school to announce. First of all, the school strictly prohibits any student from entering the Forbidden Forest without permission, and our administrator, Mr. Filch, asked me to tell you that the corridor on the right side of the 3rd floor is also a forbidden area. If you don't want to die miserably, don't go there. Thanks." "Are you sure this isn't a guide?" Richard thought speechlessly. Suddenly a vicissitudes of voice sounded from above. "You may think I'm not pretty, but don't judge people by their appearance. If you can find a smarter hat than me, I can eat myself up. You can make your bowler hats black and shiny, make your top hat smooth and crisp. I'm the top hat for the Hogwarts test. Nature stands above your hats. Any thought hidden in your mind can't hide from the golden eyes of the devil's hat. Try it on, and I'll tell you. Which college should you go to? You are absolutely safe advertisement because I am a thinking hat. Okay, if you hear the name, please come forward. Hannah Abbott, sure enough. It's the protagonist of Flowing Water, the Iron Hannah Abbott." Richard couldn't help thinking. After a while, the Sorting Hat shouted Hufflepuff. In this way, the little ones came forward to sort them one by one. First, Hermione and Ronald were assigned to Gryffindor, and Malfoy was assigned to Slytherin. The Sorting Hat, who had struggled with Harry Potter for a while, finally assigned him to Gryffindor. Finally, it was Richard's turn at the end. Richard Harris, Professor McGonagall greeted Richard, immediately stepped forward, feeling uneasy at the same time, wondering if the Sorting Hat can penetrate the protection of the storage, see through his thoughts. It's not that Richard is afraid of the Sorting Hat, after all, it's just an item. What Richard wants to verify is the storage at the same time. Richard also inadvertently saw that Dumbledore was obviously serious. After Richard sat on the chair, Professor McGonagall put the Sorting Hat on his head. The wide brim of the hat directly covered Richard's eyes. "Very strange, little wizard. I can't even see your thoughts, as if something enveloped you." Suddenly Richard heard the voice of the Sorting Hat ringing in his mind. "This is my own attempt, but I didn't expect it to succeed." Richard quickly responded. "What a clever little wizard. Just a little reckless. Where do you want to go, Gryffindor or another house?" "Don't go to Gryffindor," Richard replied firmly. "Anyone who goes to Gryffindor, only reckless ones, and not too close to Harry Potter." "Okay, then I know." Then the Sorting Hat yelled Ravenclaw. There was a scream from the long table on the far right under the stage, and there were faint sighs on the other tables. The boys in this class are all crooked, plus Richard's super good looks, so that many little witches feel sorry for them. Richard looked over. Well, he was more sure of his thoughts. Ravenclaw's better. There are so many young ladies. Afterwards, Richard quickly ran to the table in his college, and at this time, a little wizard had already vacated the seat for him. "Advertisement, I really appreciate you, you're welcome. Ravenclaw itself has very few boys. I think you should prefer to be with boys. After all, girls are too annoying. By the way, my name is Terry Boot, and you can call me Terry." "Richard," Richard replied through gritted teeth. Since Richard was the last of the sort, Filch quickly removed the stool and the Sorting Hat after he got down, and Dumbledore stood up again. "I think everyone is hungry. Let me say one last thing, idiot. scream, residue, twist. Then he sat down, and the food that had been prepared appeared on the dinner plates of various colleges in an instant. What a crazy old man, Terry said while eating. Crazy? Then you're thinking wrong. Although he resented Terry for interfering with the young lady, Richard still explained to him, then took out his wand and flicked it in the air, and the coffee in the nearby cup also formed the slender stream of water floated in the air what Dumbledore just said, and then Richard tapped it lightly, and it became another language. Merlin bless you, it's Latin. Extraordinary intelligence is the greatest wealth of human beings. On the opposite side of the table, a young lady who was obviously a few grades older than them said softly to Richard while holding a cup of coffee. Richard smiled shyly at him like pretending to be tender. However, when Richard inadvertently saw the professor's seat through the young lady, he found that Dumbledore was also looking at him and winked at Richard. Richard quickly picked up his coffee as a gesture. Damn it. Why is this old bee looking at me? Hurry up and see your savior. I don't know if it was unintentional, but when Richard looked at the professor's chair again, Dumbledore was no longer paying attention to Richard. I hope it's just a coincidence. System, have you finished loading? I've arrived at Hogwarts. Come out now. Richard called his system in his mind while eating. But the only thing in my mind is loading. It won't break. What about the aliens? Come fix it. The more he thinks about it, the more angry Richard can't help but turn his anger into appetite and eat again. But Richard didn't notice that the interaction with the system in his mind just now took a long time, and everyone else has basically after eating, only he was still biting the chicken leg. When Richard found out why the surroundings were so quiet, he just raised his head and found that the students in the whole college were looking at him, and Dumbledore on the professor's seat was also watching him, and then other professors and students in other colleges also went to look over here. Damn old bee, isn't this killing me? Richard's entire face flushed with shame. At this moment, everyone laughed, and Dumbledore took off his glasses and wiped away his tears with a smile. Amidst these laughs, Richard faintly heard Hermione's voice. His name is Richard. He is my friend. I don't need you to promote it for me. At this time, Richard even cut Hermione's heart. Chapter 7. With Richard feeling ashamed, the first dinner of the meeting was finally over. Under the leadership of the prefects, the students from each college walked to each lounge through the revolving stairs. When the teams gathered, some students from other colleges laughed when they saw Richard. Richard had no choice but to lower his head and followed closely behind the senior students. When you go through the spiral staircase and come to the top of the tower, you will arrive at Ravenclaw's lounge. There is an eagle-shaped bronze knocker at the door. Seeing someone coming, the eagle opened its mouth and asked, "What is the most precious treasure of mankind?" "Extraordinary wisdom is the most precious wealth of human beings," all Ravenclaws replied in unison. After all the students entered the common room, the senior students went back to the dormitory, while the first-year wizards were left behind. "Hello, everyone. I'm Penelo Crivet, the prefect of Ravenclaw. You've just arrived at the school. You'd better take note of the change of the stairs, otherwise you will definitely lose points for being late for class. Although we don't care about the Academy Cup, we definitely don't. I will do stupid things. It's already late. Girls, follow me." After speaking, Penelo took the girls back to the girls' dormitory. There are very few students in Ravenclaw as a whole, and even fewer boys, so basically there is a dormitory for one person. When Richard took out some necessary things and laid them out, and then wrote a letter to his family to inform him that he had arrived safely, he asked Barnaby, the name Richard gave the raven, to send it back. The time has come to the night. Richard climbed onto the bed and continued to call his sixth system affectionately. System, come out. Dad loves you." At this time, the loading in Richard's mind finally changed, slowly changing from loading to finished loading. Finally, the system is finally ready. I thought this old 6 was broken. Advertisement. Richard was so excited that he couldn't control himself. Fortunately, he was alone in a dormitory. If someone saw him, he would think he was insane. Slowly, a book appeared in my mind. How could it be a book? I thought it was $19,999, really low. "Hello, host. I am your system assistant." Suddenly a voice sounded in my mind. "Tell me, what are your abilities?" A good host, according to the rules of the creator, no other ability outside this world can appear in this world. After scanning the world these days, I found a kind of ability that is more useful to the host. What ability? Say it quickly. Say it quickly. The power of fantastic animals. What's the use of the magical animal's ability? Can it steal gold coins? Richard couldn't help but think of Shishio. That's just a kind of magical animal. After scanning, even in the castle of Hogwarts, there are two relatively advanced magical animals. Obtaining their abilities can also make a qualitative leap in your strength, and there are some magical animals in this world. The top magical animals have not been discovered by the wizarding world. This needs to be explored by yourself. Can't you give me all these abilities directly? It's too troublesome to explore by yourself, Richard complained. Sorry, host. This is the creator's rule, and the system can't help it. Okay, then tell me how to obtain the ability of the artifact animal. A good host, as long as the magical animal is confined, no life is not acceptable, and there is no ability to fight back. The host will randomly draw a reward when the host touches the magical animal. If the host is not satisfied with the reward obtained, he can give up obtaining it and convert it into accumulation. Experience points are used to improve the level of ability acquired. The lowest level is 0, and the highest level is 5. Among them, level 4 is the limit of the ability, and level 5 will cause a qualitative change. The qualitative change performance of each ability is different. Please refer to the illustrated book for details. The illustrated book will show in detail the magical animals that have been in contact with and the level of ability they have obtained, and different magical animals will increase the number of draws according to the number of surviving animals. The number of the lowest level is more, and each touch can only be drawn once. The only magical animal can independently choose an ability once. At the same time, considering the strength of the host, the growth of the host has been accelerated as much as possible. The host has 3 opportunities to choose independently, and it will be obtained randomly after 3 times are used up. Okay, the introduction of the host system is complete, and the system auxiliary module will be closed soon. Goodbye. Don't go now. 3 times is too little. Come a few more times, Richard shouted hastily advertisement, but there is no response. It seems that the support has been turned off. At this time, Richard began to observe the virtual book in his mind. After the book was opened, blank boxes appeared one after another. It seemed that it could only appear after being in contact with magical animals, and it was basically useless now. Thinking of this, Richard turned off the system. I started to think about it. The magical animals that I could come into contact with in the Protection of Magical Animals class in the 1st grade were relatively rubbish. Basically, they could only be used as experience points. If you want to gain more abilities, you must have more contact with Hagrid. After all, Hagrid, as a ranger of the Forbidden Forest, can come into contact with many magical animals. The 3 independent choices are very important. This is the opportunity for rapid development. After all, you can get abilities randomly, and Richard doesn't know whether he is European or African. According to the original book, the more powerful ones that can be encountered in the 1st grade are the giant monster in the women's bathroom, the acromantula in the Forbidden Forest, and the unicorn sucked by Voldemort's blood. The giant monster has no special ability, and the 8-eyed giant spiders should be able to, but may not be able to limit them. So the most important thing is Hagrid's Norbur, Norwegian Ridgeback. As a well-known mythical beast, Richard intends to take a chance to see if there are any surprises. Then there is the little boss basilisk in the 2nd grade. This is definitely a must. When the level is low, even if you can't kill people with your eyes, you should be able to petrify. No matter how many basilisks exist in the world, one must leave a chance. For the last time left, it is best to choose Phoenix, but Phoenix has been staying in Dumbledore's office, and it is difficult to get in touch. Even if he can get in touch, there is no way for Richard to limit Phoenix, so let's talk about it later. As for why these 3 chances were used up so quickly, instead of saving them for encountering stronger magical animals in the future, Richard said that he is not brain dead, as the so-called slow step-by-step. If you don't upgrade quickly at the beginning, you may not be able to reach it. Later, after all, the noseless villain will attack the school in a few years, so he needs to grow up as soon as possible, not to mention being able to step on Voldemort and punch Dumbledore. At least he can't become cannon fodder. Just when Richard was still thinking about how to grow stronger, deep in the Forbidden Forest, a group of centaurs were talking to Dumbledore. According to the astrology a few weeks ago, there should be a crisis far surpassing Voldemort in the wizarding world, but I don't know why just now, the astrology suddenly changed and the crisis disappeared. This has never happened before. Just when the crisis was over, a star suddenly burst into light that enveloped the entire wizarding world, but then dimmed again. Forenza, don't worry about things that haven't happened yet. The main danger now is Voldemort. You know that Harry Potter has entered school, so Voldemort should start to act. Please pay more attention to the situation in the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid informed me. Yes, Professor Dumbledore. Chapter 8. Because he studied the system and planned, brain supplement, magical animals at night, Richard went to bed late, and the result was that he woke up late the next day. When Richard rushed to the Transfiguration classroom in a hurry, Almost everyone was already there. After looking around but not seeing Professor McGonagall, Richard quietly came to sit next to Terry. According to the class schedule, Ravenclaw is basically taught with Hufflepuff. Why are you so late? I knocked on the door of your room in the morning and there was no response. I thought you had already come out. Oh, don't mention that I went to bed late at night and didn't get up in the morning. Hasn't the professor come yet? I didn't see it, but you didn't see a cat squatting on the podium just now? Hearing this, Richard sat up straight in peace of mind and looked forward. At this moment, a tabby cat gracefully jumped onto the podium from below. Look, this is it, Terry said, pointing at the cat. Richard knew that this was Professor McGonagall's animagus, so he quickly pulled Terry's hand off. At this moment, the class bell rang. The tabby jumped up and transformed into Professor McGonagall from the air. Mr. Harris, I hope you will be earlier next time. If you are late, I will turn you into a pocket watch. 1 point off Hufflepuff. One of you is late. Just as he was talking, a student hurried in. Okay, sit down first. Transfiguration is the most dangerous and complicated magic that you can touch at Hogwarts. If someone messes with my class, never come in. As he spoke, Professor McGonagall took his wand, waved it lightly, and the desk on the podium turned into a pig, and then waved his wand again to make it change back. The students were all attracted by this magical scene. Advertisement: this is transfiguration, great and magical. But you must keep in mind that the food created by transfiguration cannot be eaten. Take out your books. I hope you have previewed. Otherwise, you may not understand what I said. While speaking, Professor McGonagall waved his wand, and a blackboard appeared on the podium. There are details of wand waving and spellcasting. Then each sent a match. Now you can try to turn this match into a needle. Hearing this, the little wizards excitedly drew out their wands and began to wave them around. Terry next to Richard also kept waving at the match and almost hit Richard, but there was no reaction except for a flash of his wand. Be aware of your emotions. You need to believe that you can do it. Richard couldn't see it and said something next to him. After speaking, Richard took out his wand and waved it lightly at the match, and the match on the desk instantly turned into a silver needle. Richard also tried it during the holiday, and there was no reaction at first, but Richard thought that this is the world of magic, and magic is all about idealism. That is, emotions, just like in Goblet of Fire. The killing curse Ava for Dassault's death curse. One must have a strong desire to kill the enemy when casting the spell. After thinking about it, Richard will be able to cast the most basic transformation spell. At this moment, Professor McGonagall was also looking at this side, showing a trace of surprise on his face, and then showing a rare smile. Ravenclaw plus 10 points. Very good, Mr. Harris. It seems that you have learned. It was successful in casting the spell for the first time. No one had ever done it before. Not even a pureblood wizard could do it. What's more, Professor McGonagall heard what Richard said to Terry, which is not something a first-year wizard can know, especially a muggle wizard. Until the end of Get Out of Class, no wizard except Richard can completely turn matches into needles. Just when the little wizards were walking out, Mr. Harris, please wait a moment, Professor McGonagall said to Richard. Richard was slightly taken aback, asking me what to do, and walked towards the podium while thinking. Wait until the students are gone, Professor McGonagall said. Mr. Harris, what do you know about magic? Advertisement: Richard told Professor McGonagall the emotions and idealistic concepts he thought of during the vacation. Professor McGonagall looked at Richard with constipated embarrassment, thought for a while and told Richard, you can just know these things yourself. I hope you don't tell other students first. Okay, Professor, Richard said obediently, from the heart. What the professor says is what he says. You, a muggle wizard with no strength and no background, just listen to it. Can you still refute it? Also, since you have already learned how to turn a match into a needle, you don't have to do your homework. If you are interested in transfiguration, come to my office to find me after class in the afternoon. Yes, Professor, I am very interested in transfiguration. I will go to you after the class. After the exchange, McGonagall let Richard go. When he walked out of the classroom, Terry was still waiting for Richard at the door. Come on, Richard. We're going to dinner. While talking, the two walked to the school auditorium. During the meal, Richard saw that McGonagall didn't know what he said to Dumbledore, and then Dumbledore looked at Richard, and then whispered to Flitwick. In the afternoon charm class, he learned the levitation spell, and it was no surprise that Richard succeeded in one shot. Professor Flitwick also excitedly added 10 points to his college. However, the levitation spell is much simpler than the transfiguration. At the end of the Get Out of Class, besides Richard, 2 little wizards from Ravenclaw also succeeded, but it was a bit unstable. Professor Flitwick asked Richard to follow him to the office. Richard, may I call you that? Of course, this is the professor I want. In the Transfiguration class in the morning, I also knew about your conversation with Professor McGonagall. I have to say that you are an excellent Ravenclaw. Now I will test you. Do you know why Professor McGonagall doesn't want you to tell your theory to me? Any other little wizards? Thank you, Professor. I think it's because the little wizard is too young and has serious emotions, so bad things will happen. Yes, Richard, your thinking is correct. The more advanced the magic, the higher the emotional requirements. Little wizards can't manage their emotions well, of course not including you, and they are likely to make regrets. As they grow older, we will gradually tell them in the teaching of charms. Okay, it's good that you know. This is what Dumbledore asked me to tell you. You don't have any other thoughts, by the way. Professor McGonagall should be waiting for you in the office. You go. But you have to remember your college the boss is the charms professor. You can't miss the charms class. I will ask Pinello to give you a book list later. You have to read it carefully. After speaking, Professor Flitwick winked at Richard. Chapter IX Book List. Another book list. Walking out of Professor McGonagall's office with Richard was a long list of books, all related to Transfiguration. Seeing that dinner was still some time away, Richard went straight to the library. Remember that you can't make loud noises, eat, or destroy books here. If I find out, you will never want to come in again. By the way, pay attention to the labels. You must never enter the restricted book area. As soon as he entered the library, Richard saw Mrs. Pants talking to a little girl. It turned out to be Hermione. No wonder she came to the library on the first day. Richard was about to sneak in quietly when Mrs. Pants spotted him. I'm sure you heard it too. Don't make me repeat it. Richard, I just said you'll definitely come. Hermione saw Richard's eyes light up. Then he took Richard to the bookshelf and started looking for books. Are you here to do your homework too? No. Professor McGonagall gave me a list of books, and I'm here to find books. I've heard all about it, and you transformed it in no time. Although I tried a few times, I also succeeded. Wait, I will definitely catch up with you. When I finish my homework, I will show you to Professor McGonagall next time. Book list. As Hermione's voice got louder, Mrs. Pants's eyes focused on this side. Hermione was also aware of this problem, and quickly took a book and found a seat and sat down. Richard wiped his brow that was about to sweat. Hermione was not a cute little girl now, and needed to be hit a few times. Then I found a few books on the book list, thought about it, and made it to Hermione's neighborhood. Hermione smiled contentedly when she saw Richard approaching, and immediately started studying again. Richard came here, not because he had any thoughts about Hermione. After all, cute is cute, but a little girl who is only 11 or 12 years old. Richard is not a pervert. The main reason is to have the opportunity, to get close to Hagrid's dragon, and to be able to join the protagonist under the premise of the group, participate in some things. Advertisement. Judging from the magic learning situation, my own talent should be top-notch, and there are nano-storage devices. In addition to system enhancement, I should also learn more magic to enhance my own strength. Otherwise, if I am a traverser, if I am bullied by the natives, are you still laughing to death? Thinking of this, Richard began to continue the road of copying. Time is like a wild donkey. It can't stop when it runs. The sky was also getting dark, and Mrs. Pants was already calling people in the library to have dinner. Although it was just a simple scan, Richard was also quite tired. After stretching, he turned his head and saw Hermione staring at him blankly. Were you reading just now? Of course, I just read faster. If you don't believe me, I can memorize every page you turn. After speaking, he randomly picked out a book and handed it to Hermione. Hermione tried to turn a page, and Richard memorized it verbatim. Devastated, Hermione returned the book to Richard and followed Richard out of the library sadly. On the way to the auditorium, Hermione regained her composure, grabbed Richard, and said solemnly, "Am I admitting defeat? Let's see who can take the first place in the final exam." Richard was taken aback, smiled, and touched Hermione's head. Come on. To be honest, Richard doesn't care about being first and second. As an adult soul, he is not going to compete with a little girl for the first place, but Hermione's unyielding spirit is still very touching. After arriving at the auditorium, the two went to the dining tables of their respective colleges. When Richard sat down, he found that Pinello, the prefect of his college, was sitting opposite him. Go to the library on the first day. What a qualified Ravenclaw. Here is the book list that the dean asked me to give you. Speaking, Pinello handed Richard a roll of parchment, then went on to say, "Eat faster this time, carrot. Oh, carrot. I really thank you." Richard was unable to refute and could only thank you silently. At this time, Terry and Michael also left. Come here. Hey, Richard. What did you do just now? I wanted to play wizard chess with you. Advertisement. I went to the library to check some information. Next time I'm free. At this time, Anthony also came over. All right. Ravenclaw's first grade boys are here. Did you hear that? In potions class this afternoon, Professor Snape kept asking Harry Potter questions and deducted a lot of points from Gryffindor. We have potions class tomorrow. It's a bit scary to think about it. Don't worry, you're not Harry. You won't be treated specially, Richard said in his heart. During the chat, the dinner ended happily. I don't know if it's because of his heart, but Richard always felt that people in Ravenclaw would look this way before leaving. After returning to the lounge, I didn't take a good look at the public lounge of Ravenclaw because it was relatively late yesterday, so I can visit it this time. The Ravenclaw Common Room is a large circular room with elegant arched windows on the wall, hung with blue and bronze silk, from which Ravenclaw students can see the beautiful scenery outside, such as overlooking the school grounds, Great Lakes, Forbidden Forest, Quidditch pitch, and conservatory. The ceiling is a dome with stars on it, and on the dark blue carpet below. Then there is the Ravenclaw Library that Richard is most looking forward to, which is basically donated by Ravenclaw alumni. It is said that there are some that are not in the Hogwarts library. Staring at these books, Richard couldn't help rubbing his eyes. It's amazing. Arik, the male prefect who was basically invisible at ordinary times, was reading a book, and he couldn't help saying when he saw Richard standing in front of the bookshelf rubbing his eyes. Anyway, just scan it once. I was just worried about my eyes being short-sighted, so I didn't dare to speak out for fear of being beaten. Richard nodded. Then I flipped through a few books casually, but didn't start scanning. Although I didn't need to read carefully, my eyes were indeed a little tired. While flipping through the book, I recalled the fanfiction I read on a certain Lou in my previous life. It is said that each founder has a secret room to select successors who meet his requirements. The secret room of Ravenclaw seems to be related to the Ravenclaw Library and the Eagle Mouth Knocker. By the way, there is also Ravenclaw's Ghost Helena. This needs to be explored by yourself, but don't worry. After all, you have just arrived. According to the plot, there are still 4 years of good life to live. Richard went back to his dormitory after casually flipping through it, gave himself a cleansing spell, and then went to sleep. In his previous life, Richard couldn't figure it out. They were all young wizards who wandered around every night and didn't sleep. Really? Okay, can you grow taller? Anyway, Richard is not a nocturnal traveler. Except when necessary, he can't talk too much, avoiding the law of true fragrance. That's it. A night without dreams, neither hugging from left to right, nor hands in pockets. I don't know what an opponent is. Alas, I really don't know what the meaning of sleeping is. Richard, who had been lying in bed for a while, finally defeated the quilt monster and woke up. Chapter 10. After calling Terry and Michael up, several people came to the auditorium together and started eating. At this moment, a group of owls flew over, and Barnaby was also among them. They swooped down and threw a letter, which landed perfectly on Richard's head. Opening the letter blankly, it was a reply letter from the Harris couple. The letter was full of curiosity about the magical world. Even Mr. Harris looked for the leaky cauldron when he was in town, but he couldn't find it. Not only can I understand this through Richard, he asked all kinds of weird questions, mixed with a few words of Mrs. Harris's reluctance for her son to leave her, and finally feeling that it is so good for the raven to deliver the letter. Richard couldn't help curling his lips. Another one is really sweet. Isn't it that normal people use owls to send letters? After breakfast, Richard came to the potions classroom. This is a dark basement with some old desks around the classroom. Richard found a random seat and sat down. After a while, all the little wizards came together. Obviously, everyone had heard about it. After all, everyone envied Harry Potter, but no one wanted to be the second Harry Potter. Michael ran up to Richard and whispered, "Have you previewed it? I took a look at it yesterday. I watched it too, but it should be fine. After all, you're not Harry Potter. The professor won't pay attention to you." "Oh, why?" Just as Richard was about to say something, a gust of black wind passed Richard, and then Richard bit his own tongue. Professor Snape stood at the front of the room. "You have come here to learn the exact science and exacting craft of potion making." He spoke, though not loudly, but everyone could hear him. Probably because of what happened to Harry Potter yesterday and Snape's image, the classroom was silent, not even daring to breathe louder. Many of you won't believe it's magic, as there's no foolish wand waving here. I don't expect you to really appreciate the beauty of that simmering cauldron with its white smoke and fragrance. You don't really understand the liquid that flows into people's veins, the magical power that makes people's hearts sway and their minds blur. I can teach you how to increase your reputation, brew glory, and even prevent death, but there must be one thing. That is, you are not just the kind of dumbass fools I've come across all the time. Okay, let's start class. Although most people can't accept Snape's way of teaching, it doesn't stop him. Snape is currently the youngest master of potions in the wizarding world, and as long as Snape's poisonous words were removed, what was left was basically the essence of refining potions. So even though there was only one class, it also benefited Richard a lot. After finishing potions class, Richard planned to continue to the library, but when passing by the Quidditch training ground, he found that Gryffindor and Slytherin were taking flying lessons. Advertisement knowing that a good show is about to be staged here, the opening battle of the Savior. So Richard slowed down slowly. At this time, all the little wizards on the playground stood in 2 rows, each with a broom on the ground on the right side of their bodies. Everyone was saying, "Get up, get up." Harry Potter deserved to be the protagonist. The broom flew into his hand the first time, and then Malfoy. After a while, almost all the little wizards picked up brooms. Mrs. Hooch blew a whistle and said to the crowd, "Now everyone rides on the broomsticks. As soon as I whistle, you pedal hard. Remember to pedal hard." There was a beep. Before the other little wizards moved, a little wizard had already floated up and was flying higher and higher. "Mr. Longbottom, Mr. Longbottom, come down, come down." Seeing this, Richard couldn't help curling his lips. It's too unreliable. Mrs. Hooch is also a professor. Isn't that a bit obvious? He wouldn't believe it if there was no script. But Neville is already in dire straits, so let's help. Thinking of this, Richard walked towards Neville, who was flying around in the air. While Neville was flying around in the air, he was scratched by the statue on the castle and fell off the broom, just when a group of little wizards were screaming, "Wingardium Leviosa!" At this moment, Richard walked over with his wand and cast a spell on Neville, and Mrs. Hooch ran over in a hurry, took a look at Richard, and took Neville down. "Very well. Which college are you from, and why are you here?" "Hello, Professor. I'm from Ravenclaw. I wanted to go to the library, but I came here when I saw Neville flying around in the air." 10 points for Ravenclaw. "Thank you, Professor. I'll go first." After speaking, Richard nodded to Hermione and left. "Who is he?" Harry asked Hermione curiously. "Advertisement, his name is Richard. He's from Ravenclaw, and they're all in my dad's clinic. He's amazing." "Yes, he is my biggest opponent in the exam," Hermione said confidently. Richard walked towards the library in a cool, pretending to be B, following the little wizard's discussion. When Richard finished the book and came out of the library, the sky was already a little gray. When I came to the auditorium and just sat down to eat, I heard the people next to me discussing the afternoon. First of all, Richard's levitation spell saved Neville, so Professor Flitwick came here to praise Richard. Secondly, Harry Potter became a Gryffindor, even the youngest seeker at Hogwarts. In the afternoon, there were actually several reasons for Richard's action. The first was that he wanted to help Neville. The second was that although he didn't join the protagonist group, it would not be awkward for the follow-up. Can you change the plot? Now it seems that it is not known whether it is the compatibility of the original time and space or Dumbledore does not allow others to intervene. The general trend cannot be changed. There is actually no difference between these 2 types of Richard, who is currently weak. We still have to continue to live steadily and develop ourselves secretly. Just thinking about it, Hermione walked over with her 2 useless men and Neville. "Richard, I came here just to thank you," Neville said timidly. "It's okay. This is just a matter of convenience. You are really amazing. I heard Hermione say that you are also a new wizard. I thought you were a wizard from a pureblood family. You are much better than them." "Well, I didn't say you, Ronald," I said. Malfoy. Harry gave an embarrassed Ronald a look. "As long as you read more books and practice more, you can do it too." Yes, Hermione could, but Ronald and Harry, well, maybe a little longer. You see, right? I told you to go to the library and read more books. Hermione looked arrogantly at her 2 useless men. At this moment, Richard accidentally saw an old bee looking at this side, which made him tremble. Sure enough, I can't have too much contact with them, but I can't stop contacting them completely, otherwise it will be very conspicuous when important events come. Richard, who was perfunctory to everyone while thinking, finished his dinner under the watchful eyes of Dumbledore. The new book set sail, seeking data support. Chapter 11. It was finally the first session of the Protection of Fantastic Beasts class. Although there would not be any special magical animals, Richard was still full of excitement as he could try out the system for the first time. Hello, little wizards. For many young Muggle-born wizards, they may not have seen magical animals. First of all, I want to say that, except for a few small animals, Most of the magical animals are dangerous. When encountering unknown magical animals, the first thing you need to do is stay away from them. Of course, you are still in the first grade now, and the school does not allow you to come into contact with two dangerous magical animals. But even so, you must carefully prepare every word I say. As he spoke, Professor Kettleburn took out a plush from the box behind him. Okay, now we're in groups of 2, and each group arranges for one person to come and get a cattail. Richard and Terry are in a group. In order to avoid any phenomenon of triggering the system for the first time, Richard did not go to collect it, but let Terry do it. After a while, Terry came back hugging Poo Rong Rong. This is a spherical creature, covered with a layer of milky yellow soft hair, just like a dandelion. And in the middle of its body, there will be a long and slender pink tongue sticking out like a snake, as if looking for food. At the moment when Richard reached out to take it, a screen suddenly appeared in front of him, and a 3D image of a plush appeared on the first frame of the open book on the screen. A dialogue pops up in the middle. It has been detected that the magical animal has no ability to attack the host. The default is the restricted state. Whether to enable the extraction mode now. Yes, turn it on and let me see. Whether to use autonomous extraction, of course it can't be used, and Richard quickly refused to use it. 1/1 is being randomly selected. Experience value +1 with a black face on his face. Richard handed the plush to Terry. How can you get experience points randomly? Although the pudding is really useless, it is too foolish to get experience points randomly. Advertisement: this is how to play if you encounter rare magical animals in the future. Thinking of rare magical animals, Richard suddenly thought of a question and raised his hand to ask the professor. Professor, can people without magical powers see magical animals? Why haven't they seen them before coming to Hogwarts? Oh, Mr. Harris, that's a good question. Muggles can also see magical animals. You can see phoenixes, unicorns, and the like in many Muggle literary works. This is beyond the imagination of Muggles. As for why you haven't seen them before fantastic animals, first of all, some types of magical animals can avoid the attention of Muggles by themselves, and they all have very effective concealment methods. Secondly, there are 27 kinds of magical animals that are hidden according to their size, ranging from dragons to bandoms, undetected by Muggles. However, there are still some magical animals that often appear in the eyes of Muggles. For example, in Loch Ness, the largest horse-shaped water monster in the world is called the Loch Ness Monster by Muggles. If you have actual contact with Muggles, no matter it is Muggles catch or cause Muggle casualties, then the Ministry of Magic will intervene, and the Oblivion Charm will be a very useful spell at this time. Hearing this, Richard can be regarded as unraveling the troubles of his previous life. Then Richard started to fumble around with other groups, and finally touched all the plush before the get-out of class ended, and it was fortunate that he was in class with Hufflepuff. The result of Richard's last class is experience +12. Originally, he had touch skills, but his tongue became longer. If it was the previous life, Richard would not be unable to accept this, but what's the use here? So you can only give up the skill selection experience. Sure enough, let's learn magic well first. This system can only come to a wave of explosions, and you can improve it when you encounter good skills. After lunch, Ravenclaw has a defense against the dark arts class in the afternoon. Richard didn't plan to have any form of contact with Voldemort until he had no strength in the early stage. So this class Richard still intends to keep a low profile. Of course, under normal circumstances, Voldemort would not show his face. After all, this is Hogwarts, and here is the #1 wizard Dumbledore. Even Voldemort had little chance of winning against Dumbledore when he was at his peak, let alone the current remnant state. Except when Voldemort couldn't control himself when he met Harry Potter, under normal circumstances, Voldemort would be in the off state. So at the beginning Richard chose a backseat, took out a literature about transfiguration borrowed from the library, and started reading. Advertisement: after a while, the little wizards all came to the classroom. Defense against the dark arts itself is a course that the little wizards are more interested in, and they are a lesson earlier than Gryffindor, and they haven't heard any weird remarks, so they are still looking forward to this lesson. Terry also came in and asked strangely next to Richard. There are no seats in front. It's a pity. I heard that Professor Quirrell graduated from Ravenclaw, our senior. It's a pity, Richard said perfunctorily. When class was approaching, before the professor arrived, a smell of garlic wafted in, and then a professor wrapped in a thick scarf walked in. With his footsteps, the smell of garlic became stronger and stronger, and some of the eaglets who took the initiative to sit in the front row started rubbing their eyes. Professor, can you take off the scarf? After all, it's only September and the weather is still relatively hot. At this time, A little wizard couldn't stand it and asked, This is not acceptable. Professor Quirrell stammered back. While talking, Quirrell hurriedly covered his scarf with his hands, as if the scarf would fly away if he let go. Garlic can drive away vampires. When I was in Romania, I met a vampire. This was how I got rid of it. As long as I pick it off, the vampire will definitely catch me. As for this scarf, it was given to me by an African prince. I helped him drive away a zombie. This is a symbol of our friendship. As he spoke, Quirrell nodded, as if affirming his statement. Listening to the professor's experience, the little wizard felt as if he had been brainwashed that the smell wasn't particularly bad anymore. Richard listened to Quirrell's nonsense from behind, couldn't help curling his lips. The following lessons were quite satisfactory, without any disturbances. Basically, every lesson followed the script. Accompanied by Quirrell's stuttering voice, Richard even felt sleepy. It was similar to the previous History of Magic lesson. The new book set sail, seeking all the data. Chapter 12. In this way, Richard's Hogwarts wizarding journey proceeded step by step in an orderly manner, taking classes, going to the library, chatting with Hermione, listening to her complaining about the two useless men. Although the current life is relatively flat, but Richard is still very sufficient, and his magic power is also improving rapidly. As for the waste system, in addition to experience, it is still experience. Now it is time to wait for an opportunity. Thinking that Halloween is coming soon, the first plot point is about to appear, and Richard also wants to use this opportunity to see his own strength. In this way, the time slowly came to the day of Halloween. Richard came to the Great Hall and glanced at the Gryffindor table, but Hermione wasn't there. Richard went to sit down at the table in his college first, and started showing off the food absent-mindedly. Although the food on the table was very refined, Richard still felt that he had no appetite. There is nothing to worry about. Hermione is the protagonist after all, there will be no problem. While comforting himself, he casually picked up the pumpkin pie in front of him. Now it's time for Quirrell to start acting. Not long after Richard was kept waiting, Quirrell, who was wrapped in a large scarf, ran and panicked not long after the banquet started. Troll. The troll is in the underground classroom. I think you should know. After finishing speaking, Quirrell passed out on the ground, and the whole school erupted in an instant, and the little wizards, especially those in the lower grades, began to scream in terror. Is this Hogwarts? Just a troll, not to mention Dumbledore. There are 4 deans, and there are more normal professors to deal with a troll, not to mention effortless. It should be pinched by hand, and for no reason a troll came to the school. Is everyone else blind? At this time, a loud voice sounded in everyone's ears. Quiet, please be quiet. Now the prefects are taking the students from each college back to the dormitory. The professor will go to the basement with me. Please proceed in an orderly and quiet manner. Hufflepuff this way. Ravenclaw this way. As soon as the words fell, the prefects of each college began to gather the wizards of their own colleges, and led the team back to the dormitory. Terry, I'm going to the bathroom first. After saying that, Richard walked towards Gryffindor. The bathroom is not over there. Terry was about to say it, but he didn't say much after thinking about it. At this moment, Richard walked over to Harry and Ronald and heard the two talking about Hermione. Advertisement, Harry. Why isn't Hermione here? Richard, Hermione's gone to the bathroom. We're going to find her. After speaking, the 3 of them walked out of the team and ran to the toilet. As soon as I got to the corridor next to the toilet, I found a huge figure dragging a stick and walking towards the toilet. At this time, Hermione just came out of the bathroom, just in time to meet the troll. He screamed and ran back. The 3 people who heard the voice also realized that Hermione must have encountered a troll, so they ran quickly. When they rushed to the bathroom, they found that Hermione was hiding under the sink, and the troll was smashing it with a stick. At this moment, Harry and Ronald started to pick up the wooden door fragments on the ground and threw them at the troll. But to no avail, the troll didn't respond at all, and continued to hit Hermione with the club. Seeing this, Richard quickly took out his wand. Quickly imprison and faint. 2 magic spells were used. The troll was imprisoned immediately, and Hermione quickly ran to the 3 of them at this time. Richard, it's a good thing you're here, otherwise I'd be unlucky today. Before Richard could say anything, the troll shook, then shook his head, and the magic ceased. Turning around angrily, he raised the wooden stick and threw it at them with a roar. Richard raised his wand at the same time. Entrust Vera. In an instant, the wooden stick in the troll's hand turned into a rope and fell down. The troll hadn't reacted yet, and of course the troll's brain shouldn't be able to react either. Under the blessing of inertia, the troll fell to the ground. Advertisement at the same time. Richard immediately manipulated the rope that the wooden stick turned into to crawl along the monster's mouth into the stomach, and halfway through, Richard turned the rope back into a wooden stick. As a result, the giant turned over in pain, and after a while it stopped moving on the ground. Richard saw that the giant monster was no longer alive, so he stepped forward and touched the giant monster carefully. The system didn't respond at all, and it seemed that the dead ones really couldn't be triggered. Richard turned to look at the three little ones. Ronald looked at him in horror. Harry also felt uncomfortable, and before Hermione could say anything, hurried footsteps came from the corridor. "My God, why are you here? And did you do this?" Professor McGonagall exclaimed. "It seems that the great savior has saved his companions again." Professor Snape stared at Richard for a while, and then started to attack Harry's CPU again. "Professors are all my fault. I thought I could deal with trolls, but obviously I can't. If it wasn't for Richard, I'd be dead, and of course Harry and Ronald." Hermione hastily explained to the professors. "I thought you had more brains than others, but you let me down, Miss Granger, because you deducted 5 points from Gryffindor. As for Harry and Ronald, you know this is a troll, and you wouldn't be so lucky if Richard wasn't here. Richard, although we all know your strength, but this is a school. I hope you can inform the professor first next time." After a pause, Professor McGonagall continued. "Harry and Ronald each add 5 points. Richard adds 10 points. There will be no next time." After speaking, the professors went out first. After glancing at the three of them, Richard also came out, and the latter three said something unknown, and Hermione ran out after him. "Are you angry?" "Sorry, they just haven't seen this, so they are a little scared, not thinking about you." "Angry? Of course not. To be honest, I don't care what other people think, and I just want to save you," Richard replied casually. At the same time, Richard didn't notice that Hermione blushed slightly upon hearing this. "And Hermione, although you don't say it, I also know why you hide in the toilet alone. Although I can't say anything about your friends and your own personality, I hope you know. Respect the fate of others, let go of the complex of helping others. Everyone's path is their own choice. Do what they should do, I believe. You should know what is the most important thing for us now." "Well, Richard, I'll think about it." While talking, they reached the separated stairs. At this time, Harry and Ronald also dared to come up. Harry smiled apologetically at Richard and said good night. Ronald didn't say a word. Chapter 13. God's Shadowless Curse. Lying on the bed, Richard recalled the process of the night, thinking about how he could improve his magic routine. First of all, there are still relatively few magic skills. More precisely, it should be that when it comes to battle, I don't know how to choose magic, and I don't have a fighting concept that I have formed. The second is the lack of means to defeat the enemy, that is, the lack of skills to destroy the enemy. Let's talk about the giant monster this time. Richard's magic basically has little effect on it. Suddenly, Richard thought that there is a black magic that can be learned in Hogwarts, and the power is not small. By the way, there are certain dangers in learning black magic. It is best to learn to counterspell first, and you can go to the library to have a look tomorrow. Time slowly passed in Richard's cranky thoughts, and with the confusion of thoughts, Richard also slowly entered the dream. After waking up the next day, there was no class in the morning, so Richard came to the library early and found related magic books about rapid healing. After reading it in detail, Richard feels that this spell is not difficult, but it should require a lot of practice to master it. Where to practice and how to practice? You can't hurt yourself first and then practice. He doesn't have the tendency of self-abuse, let alone hurt others, so he will be fired easily. Just like that, Richard fell into deep thought. Do you want to learn healing spells? Then you should go to Madame Pomfrey. Hermione, who was doing homework on the side, saw Richard struggle and said casually, "She is a school doctor, so she should be very good at healing spells." "That's right, just go directly to Madame Pomfrey. Now that I'm a young wizard, or a muggle-born wizard, it's normal to be interested in healing spells. Why have I fallen into a misunderstanding?" Thinking of this, Richard rubbed Hermione's hair excitedly and ran out of the library in the face of Mrs. Pance's glare before he was about to be beaten. After coming to the school's infirmary, find Mrs. Pomfrey, the school doctor, and tell her that she wants to learn the magic of quick healing. Madame Pomfrey still welcomes little wizards who want to learn healing spells. After all, she is the only school doctor in the school, and most of the little wizards are naughty and often get injured. Now that there is a free labor force, it is naturally more welcome, and during the meal, I also heard other professors discuss Richard, a talented young wizard, even more talented than the Dark Lord whose name cannot be mentioned. Advertisement: a wizard is also a human being. He also needs to eat, and he has a family. It is impossible to refuse a good relationship with a young wizard with a bright future. In this way, one taught attentively, the other studied hard, and together with the cooperation of the little Hogwarts wizards, a steady stream of experimental subjects came to practice for Richard, and soon Richard mastered the quick healing skillfully. This also allowed Madame Pomfrey to see that Richard's talent is really terrifying. If she only wanted to better Richard before, now she herself has a heart of love for talent. Mr. Harris, you are indeed the most talented student in the history of Hogwarts. Although the healing spell is easy to learn, it is still difficult to master it. But you must know that the healing spell or the healing system is extensive and profound. Not only if you are interested, you can study it carefully. Professor Snape is the youngest master of potions. There are only a handful of people who can stand shoulder to shoulder with him in the field of potions. Even Professor Dumbledore is far behind. Not as good as Snape's. Okay, Madame Pomfrey, I will study hard. For Madame Pomfrey's sincere suggestion, Richard accepted humbly. Then the two made an agreement that every Saturday Richard could come to the infirmary whenever he had time, and learn the magic spell of the healing system as the school doctor's assistant. Now that the anti-curse has been mastered, you can learn the black magic Shinfeng Wuyin curse. That's right, the spell that was recorded in the potions textbook of the Half-Blood Prince, Snape in the second edition. However, during the last potions class, Richard arrived early and left late, and he searched through more than half of the cabinets but still couldn't find the diary. Could it be that it was specially prepared for Harry Potter? Richard thought desperately. He was looking for this potions class. If he still couldn't find it, he could only think of a way. Soon, it was time for potions class again. Richard came to the classroom ahead of time, and when he saw that no one had come, he quickly ran to the cabinet and began to look through the books. In Richard's uneasy mood, he finally found the advanced potion making. Richard opened the cover tremblingly and saw the familiar words, "This book belongs to the Half-Blood Prince." Finally found it. Richard clenched his fists excitedly, looked around, and put the book into the storage after making sure no one saw it. Richard didn't know how to take the rest of the class. He just wanted to go back to the dormitory at night to take a good look at the spell, although Richard eagerly waited for Get Out of Class to end. Yes, he waited for Get Out of Class to end before it even started. Advertisement, however, in order to make a good impression on Snape, he still carefully completed the potion refining in class. After checking Richard's potion, Professor Snape nodded in a way that was almost invisible to the naked eye, and then added 1 point to Ravenclaw. If it weren't for Richard's hope that he could learn potions from Snape in the future, horror would immediately make him face, mainly because he was cowardly. Thinking about the book in the book, Richard was in a good mood and kept smiling at Snape. If Terry hadn't touched him, he might not have laughed out loud. It might be the first time that Professor Snape saw a student smile at him. He tightened his asterisk and quickly moved away from Richard, and when he walked away, he squinted at Richard, as if he saw something unclean. The corners of Richard's smiling mouth froze immediately. Finally, when the Get Out of Class was over, the little wizards ran away from the potion classroom like wild horses running wild. Even Professor Snape hastened his departure when he saw that Richard was still packing his things. Richard also quickly packed up his things and went to the auditorium. During the meal, Richard still couldn't help laughing and eating. He had already given up hope, but he still got it unexpectedly. This kind of lost and recovered mood is always pleasant. In the afternoon class, Richard didn't know how he got it, but he kept thinking about the books in the storage. When dinner was over, Hermione came over. "They all said you were drugged by Snape, you became stupid, and now you laugh at everyone. There's nothing wrong with you, right?" "Of course I have no problem, and Professor Snape is a good man. Why would he drug students?" "Me. I just figured out a problem, so I'm in a good mood and I'm fine. Well, I'm a little sleepy now, and I'm going back to the dormitory. Goodbye." Before he finished speaking, Richard couldn't help smiling again, and then ran back to the dormitory regardless of Hermione's eyes looking foolish. Chapter 14. Finally back in the dormitory, Richard cast a warning spell on the dormitory door, then threw his school bag aside. He took out the advanced potion making that he had been thinking about and scanned all the content in it. Except for the original text of the textbook, the rest of Snape's various annotations, as well as the shadowless magic curse, these are treasures. No matter where it is better to put it in a nano-storage, and Richard does not intend to take this book as his own. This is not some peerless secret book that will make you invincible after learning it. The content on it is just what Snape went to school. I wrote it by myself at the time, and when I learn a little more knowledge of spells, I can completely create my own skills, not to mention that there is still a way system. After recalling the content inside, especially the knowledge about the Shinfeng Shadowless curse. Richard drew out his wand and used Shinfeng Wuing on the table. At this time, all I saw was a shiny shadow blade emerging from the tip of the wand and flying towards the table. It was quietly printed on the table, and when Richard took a closer look, his face was covered with black lines. I saw that the table was intact, but a piece of paper on the table was torn from the middle. What the hell? This power is a bit weak. Isn't the method wrong? Thinking of this, Richard carefully recalled the introduction about Shinfeng Wuing in his notes, as well as Snape's related remarks. Then don't start waving your wand. Shinfeng Wuing, Shinfeng Wuing, Shinfeng Wuing. The power hasn't changed much, but the sound is getting louder. At this time, there was a knock on the door outside. Richard, are you okay? What's wrong with the loud noise in your room? Terry next door should have heard the movement and came over to ask. Richard looked at the room he had tossed about and hurriedly restored the room to its original state and cleaned it up. Then he opened the door. It's okay. I'm just practicing the spell. Okay. I think you're a little bit out of order today. Tell me something. You're not normal. Your whole family is not normal. It's okay. I'm just in a better mood today. I don't have anything to do. Let's just do it like this. I'm tired from practicing just now. I'll go to bed first. After closing the door, Richard didn't intend to continue. He did cast a lot of spells just now and felt a little tired. Lying on the bed, I took out the old textbook again and continued to read it. Although it has been recorded, relying on memories can easily make people fall into an unconscious state, falling asleep, and read it from the beginning of the meeting, mainly looking at Snape. I have to say that Snape's talent in potions is indeed a bit high. Advertisement: anyone who has read the original works knows that Snape was relatively poor when he was in school, and without sufficient raw materials, he was able to have such a deep understanding, especially regarding the processing of raw materials, which can be said to be extremely talented. There are also many innovations in the way of refining potions. Before he knew it, Richard saw the record about Shinfeng Wuing again. It was still the same. There was no deviation. No. Richard sat up straight suddenly. It was emotion. Whether it was when Snape created the spell, or when Harry used it later, they all had very strong emotions. Snape hated Harry's father and Sirius. Harry it is also used with hatred. The reason why spells, especially black magic, can make users gradually become evil is mainly due to the need to maintain negative emotions when using black magic frequently. Normal people will gradually become extreme when they are in negative emotions for a long time. Thinking of this, Richard pulled out his wand and was just about to give it a try, when he suddenly realized that this is a dormitory, and if something big happened, someone might look for the professor to change places. By the way, the room of requirement. There is a magical classroom in Hogwarts, the room of response, where special classrooms can appear according to the user's ideas, and there should be a lot of good things there. Thinking of this, Richard lay down again. It was still relatively early, and he might be seen if he went out. Wait a little later, the people in the college, especially the people next door, should go out after sleeping. Then Richard took out Snape's notes again and continued to read them. Slowly, the sound of the public room basically disappeared, and it seemed that they were all going to sleep. Richard put on his clothes and came out of the dormitory gently. After seeing that no one was there outside, he ran out of Ravenclaw's secretly lounge. Looking at the corridor where people come and go during the day, it is now empty and there is no movement at all. Richard swallowed his saliva and walked to the 8th floor. I hope there will be no problems. Just after thinking about it, I heard something. Then a ghost appeared in front of Richard. It had a broad face, big mouth and round eyes, wearing bright clothes, a tie, and a hat. Oops, it's Peeves. Come and see. There is a little wizard here, wandering around here without sleeping. I will tell Filch. Let him hang you up and beat you. Peeves screamed and floated through the air. Richard quickly recalled the spells he knew. Well, none of them worked for Peeves. By the way, Peeves is also afraid. Peeves, the Bloody Barrow seems to be looking for you. He is coming downstairs. Peeves paused, screamed, and floated upstairs. Richard also took advantage of this time to quickly walk upstairs, just in the same direction as Peeves. Advertisement: don't come here, Peeves screamed, changing direction and drifting towards the corridor. I got rid of it. Fortunately, I read novels in my previous life and knew that what Peeves feared most was the Bloody Baron. Finally came to the 8th floor. The room of requirement should be opposite to the tapestry where the troll beat Barnabas silly with a stick. Richard searched for a while and found this tapestry, but at this moment there was nothing but a wall on the opposite side. Focus on thinking you need a field to practice on, and walk behind that wall 3 times. Suddenly a very smooth door appeared on the wall. Richard opened the door and walked in. Inside was a relatively empty room. There are a few dummies displayed in the middle, and some swords and other things are hung on the surrounding walls, but they are all rusty. Richard cleared his mind of distractions, drew out his wand, and thought about tearing the target apart after a while. Shenfeng Wuing. Then he waved his magic wand, and in an instant a crack appeared on the dummy's body. Sure enough, the power is much greater. Then, Richard continued to cast the spell, and as he practiced, Richard felt that it was still flawed, or that it was still not right. At this moment, with a tilt of his hand, the spell hit the ground, and then rebounded instantly, hitting Richard's arm just in time. A special pain surged up in an instant, and Richard quickly grinned and sent quick healing to his arm. There was a coolness on the arm, and then the wound began to heal slowly. Taking advantage of this time, Richard straightened his mind, but the hatred was still not enough. But in this life, there is nothing to hate. No matter whether it is at home or at school, there is nothing he can hate. By the way, you can think about the previous life, that stupid supervisor who kept forcing him to work overtime. The more he thought about it, Richard became more and more angry. Regardless of whether his arm was healed or not, he pulled out his wand and shot at the dummy. At this time, a black light blade came to the dummy in an instant and penetrated the dummy, separating the arm of the dummy behind it. Is this power right? Looking at the scene in front of me contentedly, I finally have a skill that I can use. Chapter 16. The next morning, when Richard woke up, his head felt heavy, like he had a cold, and he just pulled out his wand to cast a healing spell on himself. I don't know why Richard almost made a sharp attack on him. After stopping himself at the last moment, Richard knew that he had to solve this problem immediately, otherwise something bad would happen. In the next few days, Richard consciously restrained himself from using magic. Even in class, he would complete the wand-casting homework in the shortest time and then put down the wand. But after going to the infirmary to use Quick Heal many times on weekends, this situation was miraculously eliminated, and I don't know if it was because Quick Heal was Shenfeng Wuing's countercurse. But Richard knew that he couldn't go on like this, but through the miscellaneous books in the library, although he also got a lot of methods, but the effect was not very good, and now there is only the last one left, learning a powerful white magic. Speaking of white magic, one cannot fail to mention a magical spell, the Patronus Charm. It is just a powerful white magic, which can not only resist Dementors, but also be used as a messenger. According to the original book, this magic spell should also have the effect of clearing negative emotions. However, this spell is notoriously difficult. In the original book, Harry learned it completely by cheating, and it took almost half a semester. Richard can't wait so long. Maybe he will come into contact with Voldemort in the near future. Regardless of these, go to the professor to see if you can learn it. Dumbledore should be the best one to use the Patronus Charm at Hogwarts. Well, get rid of this first. Even if you don't learn it, you can't run around in front of the old bee. After all, Richard still has a lot of secrets. Go to Professor Flitwick first and ask. Just do it. Richard ran to Professor Flitwick's office after taking a flight lesson in the afternoon. When Richard heard the voice coming in, he opened the door and came to the office. He saw Professor Flitwick standing on a chair and grading students' homework. Richard, what's the matter? Professor, I want to learn a spell from you, the Patronus Charm. Is it okay? This is not a simple spell. It requires profound magical power, and it is not something that young wizards of your age can learn. Advertisement Flitwick, who was just about to refuse, saw Richard's determined eyes and hesitated for a moment. Well, let me think about it first, and then I will tell you. Well, Professor, please tell me as soon as possible. This is very important. Knowing that he couldn't get the answer right away, Richard could only leave the professor's room disappointed. After Richard left, Professor Flitwick came to the headmaster's room through the fireplace in the room. Is Professor Dumbledore there? Oh, it's Flitwick. What's up? Well, Richard wants to learn the Patronus Charm, but you know he's only in first grade. Professor Flitwick, I think we all know that Richard is very talented. Although the Patronus Charm is very difficult, it is a white magic after all, and it will not cause problems for the wizard's mentality. Of course, if you're worried about problems, you can call Pang Miss Fry. She is the school doctor after all. What do you think? Okay, I see. I will call Madame Pomfrey. Hearing that Richard took the initiative to learn the Patronus Charm, Dumbledore was a little surprised. He was also a little bit happy. After all, black wizards cannot learn the Patronus Charm. In the same way, as long as Richard learns the Patronus Charm, there is no need to worry about his future. Learning black magic affects mentality. Some people will say that it is basically unnecessary to let everyone learn the Patronus Charm. The Patronus Charm is very difficult, and not many people in the entire wizarding world know it. According to Richard's current learning speed, he should be able to learn all the magic in the course by the 3rd grade at most, and he will definitely involve black magic at that time, which is basically unavoidable. After all, Dumbledore is also very good at black magic. While Richard was waiting anxiously, when it was time for dinner, Richard planned to ask Professor Flitwick after dinner, and if it was not possible, he was thinking of other ways. As if knowing Richard's anxiety, before Richard could ask, Professor Flitwick took the initiative to find Richard and asked him to come to the office after dinner. Just like that, Richard finished his dinner quickly and then looked at the professor's chair. As soon as Flitwick left, he immediately followed. After calming down in the corridor, I pushed open the door of the office. Advertisement, you are here, Richard. Wait a moment and sit down first. There is another person coming. Let's wait for her. Good, Professor. After saying that, Richard sat aside. Fortunately, Richard was not kept waiting for a long time. After a while, someone knocked on the door and came in. When he came in, it was Ms. Pomfrey. Hi, Ms. Pomfrey, why are you here? Hello, Richard. I was notified by Professor Flitwick. I really don't know why a young first-year wizard should take such a risk to learn the Patronus charm. Ms. Pomfrey looked helpless. If it wasn't for Dumbledore knowing this, she would definitely not agree. After all, it is too dangerous. Others don't understand the depletion of magic power. She has seen many little wizards become squibs because of depletion of magic power. Okay, everyone is here. Richard can teach you the Patronus charm, but after all, you are a first-year wizard, and I'm not sure if your magic power is enough. If your magic power is exhausted halfway through casting the spell, then that's too bad. So I asked Miss Pomfrey to come over. First of all, if your magic power is not enough, then you don't need to learn the Patronus charm this school year. You have to promise me this. Good, Professor. If it doesn't work, I will definitely not study hard. Richard replied, okay. Miss Pomfrey, please sit down for a while now. First of all, we need to know what the Patronus charm is. This is a very powerful white magic, and it is also a very difficult magic. It is far beyond the grasp of ordinary wizards. Now wizards mainly use it to resist dementors, purify negative emotions, conveying information, but when practiced to a deeper level, the Patronus charm is actually very lethal to dark creatures. Of course, only Dumbledore's Patronus can do it. Now let's start the practice. First, concentrate your mind and recall the most profoundly happy moments in your life, and then chant the mantra and call on the gods to guard. You try it first. Hearing this, Richard closed his eyes and silently recalled his memories of the 11 short years, from being born to walking and talking, from the excitement of thinking he had superpowers at the beginning, to the disappointment when he was hospitalized, and then it was the excitement when he suddenly received the admission letter from Hogwarts, and Richard couldn't help smiling when he thought of this. Then I heard Professor Flitwick say, fine, you're laughing. Remember the feeling. Draw your wand and call out the spell. Call God to protect you. Chapter 15. The Influence of Black Magic. Satisfied, after trying a few times, Richard gradually felt a change in his mentality and had the urge to find a real person to try. After realizing that something was wrong, Richard stopped and had to think about how to solve this problem. While thinking, Richard walked out of the response room. Alas, there is still something to take away. Then Richard walked around the door 3 more times, thinking he needed a hiding room. The same scene happened again. Richard opened the door and went in. Hey, what kind of hiding place is this? It's obviously a garbage dump. The entire room is filled with all kinds of discarded items. When will this be found? Richard was a little dumbfounded, thinking how big a room could be. Now it seems that this is not the case at all. This is a little bigger than a standard basketball court, and the piles are quite high. Hey, the cabinet in the corner looks familiar. Isn't this the disappearing cabinet that Malfoy sent someone in later? Although it's broken, I'd better put it away first. Then Richard first put the disappearing cabinet into the storage. As for if someone goes in, he can only ask for luck. Looking at the rubbish in the room, Richard frowned. Let's try the flying charm. The Ravenclaw crown is flying. The Ravenclaw crown is flying. Richard cast 2 flying spells in succession. There was no movement at first, and then suddenly the pile of discarded objects in the middle shook. Seeing something interesting, Richard quickly continued to cast the flying curse. At this time, a dim golden crown inlaid with a huge sapphire flew over. Richard stepped aside quickly. After all, this was Voldemort's Horcrux. Who knew if there were any curses or black magic on it? So he didn't dare to take it with his hands. Looking at the crown, Richard was a little dazed. What should I do now? I just wanted to find it, but now I found it. What should I do? Forget it. Let's put it in the storage first. Thinking of this, Richard planned to put Ravenclaw's crown into the storage, but there was no reaction at all. It won't be broken. Richard quickly thought about the disappearing cabinet just put in, and the disappearing cabinet immediately appeared to the side. And then Richard tried to put the Ravenclaw crown in, but it still didn't work. Just change it with another thing. Advertisement, what's going on here? Why can't this alone work? Is there anything special about this? By the way, the crown of Ravenclaw is Voldemort's Horcrux, and there is a fragment of Voldemort's soul inside. Does the memory store think this thing is a living thing? It should be like this, so what can I do? I can only put it here first. As for carrying it, sorry, Richard is still very afraid of death. This thing is so evil. Richard used his wand to control the crown and hid it in the depths of the waste. Then I left the room of requirement, and the way back was uneventful. Without any trouble, Richard came to the door of Ravenclaw's dormitory smoothly, answered the questions, and entered the lounge. At this time, Richard saw a tall lady standing by the window, staring blankly outside, with a light blue light emitting from the transparent figure. Ms. Grey. Richard thought of Ravenclaw's Chamber of Secrets, and was just about to go up to strike up a conversation. Unexpectedly, as expected, Ms. Grey floated away without even looking at Richard. Richard, who just wanted to use Ravenclaw's crown to save face, still restrained himself. After all, it was very late now, and it would not be good if other students heard about it. After all, Richard still didn't want to appear in front of Dumbledore too early. But what Richard didn't expect was that just now in the Hogwarts headmaster's room, a conversation about him had just ended. The two sides of the exchange were Hogwarts headmaster Dumbledore and Potions Professor Snape. Time went back to when Richard was still pondering the shadowless curse in the dormitory, in the principal's office. Dumbledore, what did you call me for this late? Take it easy, Snape. What would you like to drink? How about mead? No need. Tell me quickly if you have anything to say. I'm still refining potions. What do you think of Harry? Proud, arrogant, and stupid as hell. Really, I think Harry is a good boy. After all, he belongs to Lily. Don't mention Lily, you don't deserve it. Snape interrupted Dumbledore before he could say anything. There was anger in Snape's eyes at this moment, but there was a deadly sadness in it. Advertisement with that. Snape turned to leave the headmaster's office. Wait, Snape, I'm sorry, but I have to please watch Harry. After all, you know it's not safe in school right now. After pausing for a while, he spoke as if speaking by the way. By the way, if Richard Harris of Ravenclaw wants to ask you to learn potions, you can teach him and observe by the way. After all, we have an obligation to let them walk on the right path. Snape turned his head when he heard this. This is your purpose. You are afraid that there will be a second Voldemort at Hogwarts. Richard's talent is incomparable even for Voldemort of the same age. No, he won't. Richard is different from Tom. He has family, friends, and lives in a loving environment. He will never become Tom. I just hope he's better. Hearing this, Snape left the principal's office without looking back, and Dumbledore was still sitting there, thinking about something quietly. At this time, the portraits of previous principals on the wall also became lively. He's going to be a good healer. I've heard Pomfrey say that this student practiced well with healing spells. Darius Devant, a headmistress at Hogwarts who is also a prominent healer, division. A mudblood like this should be kicked out of the school, or he'll be the next Dark Lord, and Albus kicked him out. Elizabeth Burke, a Slytherin headmaster. It's impossible. I heard from Flitwick that Richard Harris is a very talented and good guy. He will be the second Albus, and he is a student of Ravenclaw. After that, Slytherin will become a dark wizard. Quentin Trimble, a headmaster from Ravenclaw. Dumbledore just listened to the quarrel of these portraits and didn't express any opinions, and the portraits gradually became quiet after the quarrel. After all, the current headmaster is Albus Dumbledore, and he has the final say on how to deal with the students. Dumbledore casually picked up a pile of cockroaches from the table and threw it into his mouth. Very good, honey-flavored. Yeah, you don't know what it tastes until you eat it. It's time to talk to him. As for what to talk about, who knows? Chapter 17. At this moment, both Professor Flitwick and Ms. Pomfrey held their breath and looked at Richard quietly. But nothing happened. Only Richard held his wand awkwardly. Deep in your happy memory, be more determined, and do it again, Professor Flitwick said to Richard beside him. Madame Pomfrey was about to say something when Professor Flitwick stopped her. Richard heard the professor's words and knew that this time it must not be successful. I can only start looking for my own memory again. Normal children have relatively large mood swings, so it is easy to have deep memories, but Richard came through the soul, so it is difficult to have too much deep memory. I don't know if the previous life is okay. Thinking of this, Richard began to recall the memory of the previous life. Thinking of my parents, relatives, friends, and all kinds of things from childhood to adulthood in my previous life. And because of my departure, my parents can live a healthy and long-lived life with wealth and freedom. Thinking of this, Richard slowly shed tears. Isn't it a happy memory? Why is Richard still crying? Professor Flitwick and Miss Pomfrey, who were standing next to him, looked confused. Is it hard for Richard to cry? Not so. Professor Flitwick was just about to ask Richard to stop for a break. Call God to guard. At this time, Richard cast the spell again. There was an obvious difference between this time and the last time. Large patches of white light continuously emerged from the top of Richard's wand, scattered throughout the room. How this was different from Harry Potter in the movie, Richard was also a little confused. Advertisement, don't stand still. Focus on your spirit. Hurry up. Professor Flitwick looked at Richard in a daze and quickly reminded him. Hearing this, Richard quickly concentrated his attention and held up his wand to maintain the delivery of magic power. At this time, the white light in the room began to concentrate and shrink, slowly began to condense, and gradually the white light shrank into an animal with antlers, horse head, fish scales, fish tail, rabbit eyes, snake body, eagle claws, tiger paws, and cow ears. It's unbelievable. It succeeded in the first attempt. How could it be possible? Although this animal looks strange, it's incredible that it succeeded in the first attempt. Flitwick and Pomfrey were stunned. This is a dragon. Richard himself didn't even think about it, although he was sure that he would succeed today. But he really didn't expect that his patron saint turned out to be Yen Huang's totem, the dragon. Is it because his soul is from China? To be honest, since he came to this world, Richard has always had no sense of belonging to the country he lives in now, but Richard does not intend to go to China in this world. The alien told Richard that he could not after returning to the past. Richard knew that he had to part with his former self, and the love of his current parents for Richard also gave Richard a sense of belonging to his current family. But Richard has always felt that he is like a castle in the air, without heels. Now that the patron saint appears, Richard feels inexplicably at ease. Looking at his patron saint, Richard is like a bird that has been flying for a long time and finally landed. On the ground, a sense of solidity arises spontaneously from the heart. It seems that there is no problem. The infirmary cannot be empty for a long time, so I will go back first. Richard remembers going to the infirmary to continue practicing the healing spell. After a brief shock, Miss Pomfrey looked at Richard. The patron saint has been summoned, and considering that he has been out for a long time, he is afraid that a little wizard will go to the infirmary, so he bids farewell. Richard first agreed, and then expressed his thanks to Miss Pomfrey. Madame Pomfrey then left the office. Richard, I know you are very talented, but I didn't expect to be so exaggerated that you can succeed in one go. At this moment, Professor Flitwick seemed to see Merlin alive. No, the main thing is to teach you better, Richard replied modestly. Don't be humble. That's how the Patronus charm is taught. But no one can succeed in one attempt like you, not even in a week. By the way, Richard, have you ever thought about what you will do in the future? Although Richard is only in the first grade, according to his talent, he should grow very quickly. In the future? I haven't made up my mind yet. Originally, I wanted to inherit the Harris family's farm, but I suddenly received the acceptance letter from Hogwarts, and then came here. As for what I want to do in the future, I have never thought about it. Speaking of this, Richard himself is also confused. Yes, how to go in the future. Advertisement compared to other young wizards. Richard, you are not only more talented, but also more mature in thinking. I hope you can think about it. You must know that your talent is much higher than that of Grindelwald and Voldemort. The shadow of Voldemort has not yet passed, and the talent shown in such a situation has already made some people uneasy. This is it for today. You should think about it. Professor Flitwick's meaningful words made Richard uneasy. After returning to the dormitory, Richard lay on the bed and did nothing, silently thinking about Professor Flitwick's words. It is true that since the beginning of school, my learning progress has indeed been a bit high. Who can blame this? I can only say that my talent is too high. Richard does not intend to hide his clumsiness. In his previous life, he had no choice but to hide it enough to be aggrieved, and it is absolutely impossible to fall behind in this life. As for the future path, I will talk about it later, just my own talent is already so exaggerated. If the skills of the system are activated immediately, you must know that the skills of many magical animals are not comparable to spells. Only then can I truly realize that if I want this sky, I can no longer cover my eyes. If I want this earth, I can no longer bury my heart. And if I want all living beings, they will understand my intentions. But that's in the future. If you want to stick to one dog now, you will die before you get out of the teacher. It will be a sad reminder. Thinking of this, Richard stopped thinking about it and just followed his own ideas. Then Richard took out his wand, wanted to use the Patronus charm, and summoned the dragon to come out to have a look. But after the spell was finished, there was only a white light all over the room. Richard knew that this was because he was not proficient, but he still had to try if he could eliminate the influence of black magic. Are you going to start your night tour too? Thinking of this, Richard felt sad. I am still a child, and I still need to eat enough, sleep, and grow taller. Forget it today. When I went to the room of requirement tomorrow, I thought of this. Richard wrapped himself completely in the quilt, rolled it up, and then huddled around like a maggot. Anyway, I don't plan to go for a night tour today. Hey, I just don't sleep. I just play. Chapter 18. Boom, boom, boom. Still asleep, Richard heard a knock on the door from far away, accompanied by, "Wake up, Richard. Get up quickly. Go to watch Quidditch after dinner. Come right away." It turned out that there was really a knock on the door, and Richard had to climb out of the quilt with difficulty. I gave myself a shot of clear water like a spring and instantly woke up. I have to say that magic is really convenient. When Richard opened the door, Terry and Michael were already waiting a little anxiously, took Richard's hand and ran out of the dormitory. After coming to the auditorium, Richard saw Hermione and Harry talking about something. Harry seemed very nervous, and after talking to Terry, Li Chao walked to Hermione. "Hey, Richard, are you going to watch Quidditch later? Harry is going to play for Gryffindor soon, and he's still a seeker," Hermione said proactively when she saw Richard approaching. Her eyes lit up. Harry also wanted to say hello to Richard, only Ronald, who took one look at Richard, turned his head away. "Hello." Harry seemed a little nervous just now. "So come and have a look. After all, we all hope you can defeat Slytherin." "Thank you, Richard. I'm not nervous. I'm just not hungry. Well, I'm a little nervous. I've never played Quidditch. They've been playing for a long time," Harry said nervously. "Harry, I think everyone has something they're good at, and the day I saw you catch a memory ball on a broomstick, I knew you were good at flying, better than most, and you had the genes for it. Don't be nervous. Do what you should do. Well, I'm going to eat first, and I will cheer for you later." Harry was about to ask Richard how he knew, but Richard had already turned around and left. It was fun to run after pretending to be aggressive. The main reason was that Richard saw Professor Snape walking towards him. Although he didn't hate Snape, the air pressure around him was really low, and the arrogant Snape must have come here to show affection with Harry. He didn't want to get involved and be targeted by Snape, but Richard didn't know he was being targeted by the Snake King. Advertisement: the great savior doesn't even care about trolls, let alone Quidditch, even if the opponent is a Slytherin. Snape limped away from Harry after spraying the venom on Harry. After breakfast, Richard followed his classmates to the Quidditch field and sat in the Ravenclaw Square. In the past, whether it was in movies or novels, Richard knew about the Quidditch game, but Richard just didn't understand. What is the meaning of this sport? And the team that catches the golden snitch can directly get 150 points, which makes everyone except other than the seeker. The other players didn't have any sense of presence. They really didn't understand the meaning of such an unfair game. If it weren't for some interesting tidbits in this game, Richard would definitely not have come. After a while, athletes from both sides appeared on the stage. According to the usual practice, they went around the field first, and then the game began. Richard was bored watching from below, and suddenly had a very strange idea. The woman said, "Wouldn't it be uncomfortable for a man to ride on a broom?" During the class, I felt uncomfortable when I was flying slowly on a broom, and I panicked. At this time, Harry's broom started to behave strangely, and it was twisting and turning, causing Harry to jump up and down, and was often thrown up, and then fell heavily. Richard only felt pain in his crotch. Richard, who couldn't stand it anymore, borrowed a telescope from Michael, and looked at the opposite professor's chair. Sure enough, Quirrell was chanting words there, and Snape was also chanting spells. It was very strange. According to the situation in the original book, Snape's level should be it was far higher than Quirrell, and Voldemort didn't dare to show his face in a place with so many people. It must be so deep. Why Harry's broom was still affected? Didn't Snape try his best? Probably not even with Harry's eyes. At this moment, Richard saw Hermione sneaking in under the auditorium. And then there's the much-loved burning of Snape. Seeing Snape extinguishing the fire in a panic, Richard almost burst out laughing. Are all these people fake wizards? Smiling, he noticed something was wrong. There were professors everywhere. It was impossible for everyone to think of it. Did they deliberately fail to think of it, or could they not think of it? Is this wizarding world really like in the book? Suddenly, Richard thought that the alien said before he left that there are any powerful magical animals in this world that the current wizarding world has not discovered. Is it possible that there will be many powerful wizards that the current wizarding world does not know about? What about? Advertisement. Finally, the game ended smoothly after Quirrell couldn't interfere with Harry. The game was still the same as in the original book. The golden snitch was pulled out of Harry's mouth, and finally Gryffindor won the game. Except for the Slytherin phalanx, the other three houses burst into applause. This is also what Richard didn't understand when he read the original text. In addition to Slytherin's own arrogance, Dumbledore is also intentionally or unintentionally making other houses hate Slytherin students. What on earth is Dumbledore trying to do? It feels like he is intentionally splitting Hogwarts and alienating Slytherin from the other three houses. Is it because there were more Death Eaters in Slytherin back then? Forget it, this is not something that the current Richard can interfere with. Before it involves him, let's play it safe first. With all kinds of doubts, Richard left the field. After returning to the dormitory, Richard took out the Snape textbook. After thinking for a while, he decided to put the book back as soon as possible. What happened today made Richard feel an inexplicable sense of crisis. As if he continued to keep this book by his side, something bad will happen. So Richard quickly brought the book to the potions classroom, because today is the weekend. So there is no need to worry about anyone in there. Richard pushed the door and went in, and sure enough, there was no one in the empty classroom. Richard took out the book from the storage, put him back in the original cabinet. Seeing that there were some miscellaneous books in the cabinet next to it, I went to browse them casually. It was not interesting. After putting them back, I prepared to go to the infirmary to have a look and continue to practice the healing spell. When Richard just turned around, he suddenly found that Professor Snape in black was standing behind him, who seemed to come over directly after changing clothes. "What are you doing here?" Snape asked sharply with a frosty face. "Hi, Professor. I noticed a lot of old books here during class, so I want to come over on the weekend to see if they can help my potion science." Chapter 19. Professor Snape walked directly past Richard, came to the cabinet where Richard had just put down his old books, took out the book that Richard had just flipped through, casually flipped through it, and seemingly unintentionally asked Richard a few questions about the book content. Fortunately, when Richard just turned it over, it was all recorded in the memory, so it is not difficult to return to these simple contents. "I have taken away all the valuable books in these cabinets, and the rest are meaningless books. You don't need to read them in the future." "Good, Professor," Richard replied obediently. At this moment, Richard accidentally noticed that the Snape textbook he just put back was gone. Sure enough, it was no accident that this book was here, Richard couldn't help thinking. After Professor Snape glanced at Richard, he turned and left. When he walked to the door of the classroom, he suddenly remembered what Dumbledore said, and Snape stopped and said to Richard, "Come to my office on Wednesday night after Christmas." "Good, Professor. I will be there on time." Although Richard was extremely reluctant, Snape's icy face made him dare not have the courage to refute. The originally happy mood disappeared in an instant, and a depressed Richard came to the infirmary sullenly. In the infirmary, because there are not many people today, Richard can only read some books in cases of healing spells. Although these cannot directly improve Richard's strength, they are more useful for Richard to understand the spells and the damage caused by them. Since Snape could create the Shadowless charm at school, Richard believed he could too. Sufficiently, the first day passed like this. Although the episode in the middle made Richard not so happy, he finally returned the book, but he didn't know why Snape wanted him to go to the classroom. But there's no need to worry about that, as long as Richard didn't do anything too outrageous, and as long as Richard was a student at Hogwarts, neither Snape nor Dumbledore would pay special attention to him. Advertisement. First of all, their current focus is mainly on dealing with Voldemort. Secondly, no matter how talented Richard is, he is still a first-year wizard. After all, only grown-up geniuses can be called geniuses, otherwise they can only be called premature deaths. After breakfast the next day, Richard went to the library to continue his copying business. And when Richard came to the library, he found that Hermione, Harry, and Ronald had also arrived, and he also took a bunch of books, which should be Hermione's. As for Harry and Ronald, it's probably here that they fried Hermione's homework. Instead of getting involved in their affairs, Richard found a few books by himself and continued to copy them. At this time, Richard found that Hagrid had also come to the library. Richard was a little excited. Hagrid must have got the dragon egg, and the system is finally going to work. Just when Hagrid was looking for a good book and was about to leave, Harry and the others discovered it. "Hagrid, why are you here? Do you need any help?" Harry took the initiative to go up. At this moment, Hagrid is like someone who has stolen something. Mrs. Pants also heard the voice and looked over here. Hagrid hurriedly led Harry and the others out of the library. On the way out, Hermione saw the titles From Hatching to Nirvana and Guide to Raising Dragons. Do you want to raise dragons? This should not be allowed in the wizarding world, Hermione asked, pointing to the book Hagrid was holding. No, I just wanted to take a look. You have to know what a lovely magical creature dragons are, Hagrid hurriedly explained. Then, the three of them told Hagrid about recent events at school and about Snape casting a spell on Harry, and suspected that Snape was going to steal something guarded by the three-headed dog. But the naive Hagrid naturally slipped his mouth, and Harry and the others got an important name, Nicole Flamel. Advertisement: the three little ones returned to the library as if they had been given a stimulant. But they were stopped by Mrs. Pants at the door, and they were let in after some education. Richard also left the library at this time. In case Hermione saw him and asked him who Nicholas May was, he couldn't say that he didn't know, but now Richard didn't want to tell them, so it's better to avoid it. When returning to the dormitory, Richard's raven just flew back. During the time at school, Richard basically wrote letters to his family every week. Although there was nothing special about it, Richard knew that his parents must still be worried about him, so he wrote a letter to his family every week to report his safety. Now it should be the reply letter from the parents. When I opened the letter, I found that it was indeed sent by Mrs. Harris. The main content was that Mrs. Harris's father, Richard's grandfather, was ill with cancer, and the condition was very serious. In other words, it should not be long. The Harris couple need to visit him in the United States, and considering that Richard is too young and does not want him to be exposed to death too early, so they do not plan to take him there. In this way, Richard needs to spend Christmas at school. It's the holidays. Mrs. Harris should be in a bad mood when writing this letter. Richard can feel some tears from the letter paper. Thinking about the situation of his parents, Richard quickly wrote back and told them that he was doing well at school and that many students spent Christmas at school, so don't worry about him. After feeding Barnaby some food, Richard let him write back and take it away. When he went to the infirmary to practice healing spells last weekend, Richard once asked Ms. Pomfrey if wizards have a cure for cancer. Ms. Pomfrey had already told him, I don't know if it was because of magic. Wizards, no one had ever had cancer, not even a squib, so the wizarding community had never studied cancer before. Later, after the Ministry of Magic and the Muggle Prime Minister got in touch, the Muggle Prime Minister also wanted to let wizards try to cure cancer, but although the Ministry of Magic agreed, they only found some Muggle patients with cancer to try. All the healing spells had no effect, and the magic power also has an accelerated response to cancer. In the end, the Ministry of Magic just cast the forgetting curse on these patients. After all, wizards don't know cancer, and no one recommended this research after that. There is still nothing the wizarding community can do about cancer. Moreover, Madame Pomfrey also advised Richard that the pathology of cancer is very complicated, which cannot be solved by one person, and requires a large number of pathogens, and ordinary wizards do not have the strength to study this. Richard also thought so at the time, but now that the disease is happening around him, he also has some thoughts. Chapter 20, Christmas. As time goes by, Christmas is gradually approaching. Early in the morning, the little wizards who were going home for the holidays all packed their bags, and the boys' lounge in Ravenclaw basically went back except for Richard, and a few seniors stayed at school. While going to have breakfast, Hermione also came over. Are you really not going back? Yes, I won't go back. My parents have something to go abroad, and I will be alone when I go back. I might as well be in school, Richard replied. Otherwise, come to my house. After you told me you couldn't go back last time, I asked my father, and he asked me to invite you to my house. Let's forget it anyway. There are not many days. I am in school, and I can still read books and so on. Hearing what Richard said, Hermione didn't invite her either. She knew that as long as Richard made up his mind, basically no one else could change it, and he could still study at school, which made Hermione a little reluctant to leave. Suddenly, Hermione wanted to ask something, but she didn't ask after thinking about it. After the two communicated, Hermione saw that Harry was playing chess with Ronald and walked over. Christmas, you don't go back, just go to the library to have a look. Be sure to find out who Nicholas May is. Haven't you looked for the library? Do you still want to go? The two scumbags felt a headache when they heard the library. Restricted section. Hearing this forbidden word uttered by a good student like Hermione, both of them looked at Hermione in surprise. Actually, we can ask Richard, he might know. As soon as he heard about Richard, Ronald directly refused. I don't want to get in touch with him. He will definitely be a dark wizard in the future. Harry was a little moved, but Ronald directly refused, and he couldn't say anything, although he didn't think so, but Ronald was his best friend in Hogwarts, and even as long as he could remember, and he didn't want to make friends because of this. Unhappy. But hearing this, Hermione was not happy. You're talking nonsense. Richard is a good student. He won't become a dark wizard. If you're talking like that, stop copying my homework. As soon as I heard that I didn't copy my homework in the future, it would cost the lives of 2 scumbags, so I quickly apologized. Advertisement seeing that it was time to take the train. Hermione didn't want to chat with these 2 anymore, but before leaving, she said if you don't find it during the holidays, then I will ask Richard when school starts, he must know. Although he didn't know why, in Hermione's eyes, Richard should know everything. Seeing the back of Hermione leaving, Harry and Ronald looked at each other, and the silent communication started. Shall we go to the library now? Or tomorrow? She's finally gone. Let's relax first. Well, okay. Anyway, the vacation time is still long. The 2 slags decided so happily, and then continued to play chess. After breakfast, Richard was also thinking about what to do today. Originally planned to continue to study in the library today, but for some reason, Richard felt that his condition was not very good. It may be because most of the classmates have left, and the school is much deserted. He is not a cold-hearted student, but he still hopes that the school will be more lively, and Terry and Michael have gone home, especially Hermione. It made him feel even more lonely, so let's go back to the dormitory first. In this way, the day passed. The next day, Richard got up early after he had adjusted his mentality. When Richard came to the auditorium, he saw that Professor Flitwick was arranging the Christmas tree. Richard took the initiative to run up to ask if he needed help. Richard, haven't you come home? Professor Flitwick asked curiously when he saw that Richard was still at school. Yes, Professor. There is something at home. They have all gone abroad. Well, have you seen these decorations? Hang them all on the Christmas tree with a levitation spell. While agreeing, he drew out his wand, cast the levitation charm, and began to decorate. After a while, the huge Christmas tree has been decorated. After being praised and awarded by Professor Flitwick, Richard went to eat. After dinner, Richard planned to go to the library to continue reading in the morning, and to practice the Patronus charm in the room of requirement in the afternoon. Advertisement. After spending a few days in this way, it was Christmas morning. As soon as Richard opened the door, he saw that this year's Christmas presents had been piled up by the elves at the door. Anyway, there was no one in the dormitory, so there was no need to worry about disturbing others. Richard started unpacking at the door. First of all, the Harris couple. This is basically nothing special, mainly food and clothing, but there is a document at the bottom. The main content of the document is to list Richard as the sole heir to the estate. If the Harris couple, what's the accident? Richard inherited all the properties under his name. It seems that the matter of Mrs. Harris's father this time touched both of them. Next is Hermione's gift, which is the latest edition of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, which adds several magical animals that were not included in the previous edition and a scarf that looks good. It seems that Hermione is still very hardworking. Yes, Richard felt guilty for a moment when he thought that he had randomly picked a book from his collection for Hermione. Both Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick gave Richard Christmas gifts, but they were books related to their respective disciplines. Harry even gave him a gift, even though it was just some candy, but it also gave Richard more excuses to fish in troubled waters. You see, Harry has given me presents. We are good friends. It's a good excuse to care about your friends once in a while, but don't call me when you have something to do. I'm very busy. In addition to these, there are some students from this college, basically candies, or books. Seeing these presents, Richard reflected on himself. I want to give them some gifts next year. Is it okay to keep whoring for nothing? Then proceed to unwrap presents happily. What a beautiful day. Richard never got up in bed except to eat. At night, I ate, drank, slept and slept all day, and I couldn't sleep at all at night. Richard lay on the bed depressed, counting the stars. The more he counted, the more he became more sober. Forget about sleeping. Let's go out for a walk. Thinking of this, Richard got dressed and walked out of the dormitory. As soon as he left Ravenclaw's lounge, Richard saw 2 young wizards passing by the door. Well, the little wizard who didn't go home has been out for a night tour this evening, and the clothes are indeed Gryffindor's. The 2 little wizards were surprised to see someone come out of Ravenclaw's lounge. Both sides smiled awkwardly and friendly, then turned around and took a sip. Chapter 21. Although it was a night tour, Richard was not in a panic. Anyway, he had nothing to do. It was quite charming to take a slow stroll around Hogwarts at night. As for meeting Filch, Richard thought that he would have no problem dealing with the squib. He just couldn't cast spells on him. But wouldn't it be enough to have a few buffs for him? While Richard was slowly admiring the night view and murals, he turned a corner and was suddenly hit by something. A floating head suddenly appeared on the opposite side. Richard was taken aback by this sudden scene. What the hell? Is it scary to come out in the middle of the night? Taking a closer look, it turned out to be Harry Potter. Just as Richard was about to say something, Harry hurriedly pulled Richard over, and then used the invisibility cloak to photograph Richard in two. Keep your voice down. Filch is here. What's all the fuss about a Filch? Watch me tease him. And Snape? Richard just wanted to go out. When he heard that there was still Snape, he silently retracted his raised hand, thought for a while, took out the magic spell and whispered, feeling unsafe, and came again. It was silent. Harry stared blankly at Richard. It turned out that Richard was also afraid of Snape. After a while, Snape and Filch appeared in the hallway together. Professor, you have to believe that I really have a little wizard at the stairs just now, and Mrs. Norris can prove it. How could it be possible for the cold and arrogant Master Snape to ask a cat for confirmation? And he ignored Filch and left directly. Damn little wizard. Don't get caught by me, or I will hang you up and whip you. Seeing that no one was caught, Filch could only be helplessly furious, and then took Mrs. Norris away. Advertisement. The two of them let out a sigh of relief at the same time. How come you come out for night tours, Richard? I slept too much during the day. I really can't fall asleep. Come out for a walk? How about you? I went to the restricted section of the library to find information. By the way, there is a magic mirror in that room. Do you want to see it? Okay. With that said, Harry led Richard into an empty room. There was nothing in the room except for a huge antique mirror in the middle of the room. This is a very imposing mirror reaching to the ceiling with a golden frame, supported by two claw-shaped feet, and engraved on the top with Eris Stella Oru I to be Kafir A Ishan Voorhees. It's this mirror. I can see my parents in it. Ronald said he can see his future, but my parents, come and see what you can see. Richard walked to the mirror and looked at this magical mirror. To be honest, he also wanted to know what he could see in the mirror. But Richard was a little disappointed. He only saw himself in the mirror. Hey, why is there a figure in the corner, with brown hair, very thick and unkempt, and piercing brown eyes? This is the grown-up Hermione? Sure enough, after being in contact with Hermione for a long time, he unconsciously thought of Emma. Richard is not a pervert who is interested in Lowly. I can only see myself, Richard said. Why am I the only one who can see my parents? Harry looked in the mirror full of doubts, slowly fascinated by it. Harry, be sober. This mirror is called the Mirror of Erist. It allows people to see what their heart desires most. What you see now is what your heart desires. This is virtual, not reality. Although it's cruel, but you have to know that people don't live in virtual dreams. Although I am not qualified to say anything to you, no one is qualified. After all, no one has experienced your life, but I still hope that you can look forward. Use your own efforts to create your own happiness. You have many friends at Hogwarts, and these will be your solid backing. Richard has always regretted what happened to Harry. His parents were killed when he was born, and then he was placed in foster care with relatives who had always been hostile to him. Is this how they treat the Savior? Others may not know his whereabouts, but Dumbledore knows. Why doesn't he care? At least it can improve his life. Suddenly Richard wondered if it was to make him feel better about wizards. Thinking about Harry's life at his aunt's house for so many years, now everything has changed after he came to the wizarding world. Except for most of the pureblood families, everyone likes him. From a little transparent who is neglected and has a slight domestic violence to a beloved savior, everyone knows how to choose. So Harry will definitely hold on to the wizarding world tightly, and he definitely doesn't want to go back in that bullied world. Under such a premise, someone wants to destroy his beautiful life, which will definitely inspire his greatest resistance, even at the expense of his life. Advertisement. Thinking of this, Richard looked at Harry with pitiful eyes. Luckily it wasn't me. I know, Richard. Don't worry, I won't come to see you again. You are right. I still have many friends. I want to cherish the life I have now. Can I see it tonight, and I won't come tomorrow? Looking at the poor Harry, Richard didn't know what to say. Why are there two students here? The sudden appearance of the voice startled both of them. Although Richard knew that Dumbledore was supposed to appear, so he was tense all the time, he didn't expect it to be so sudden. Dumbledore looked at the startled two, especially Richard, with a satisfied expression. Sorry to scare you guys, but the mirror is moving to a new place tomorrow, Harry, and I ask you not to look for it again. If you happen to see it someday, be prepared. Indulge in the illusion. It is useless to forget the real life of your dreams, so please remember. Well, why not put on that wonderful invisibility cloak and go back to sleep? Harry, who thought he was going to be punished, didn't want to look in the mirror anymore, and pulled Richard to leave. Wait, Harry, you go back first. I have something to talk to Richard about. Let's go. Let's go to the principal's office. After speaking, Dumbledore brought Richard to the office. Richard, would you like something to drink? Let's have black tea. Just black tea, don't add sugar. Then I'll have a glass of honey water. You must know that people always want something sweet when they get old. After speaking, with a wave of his hand, a house elf appeared in the office, and 2 cups of tea appeared on the table after a while. Okay, now let's have a good chat. Chapter 22. Richard, what do you think of the current wizarding world? The wizarding world. Very good. Magic is amazing. Richard, I hope now we can have an open conversation. That's what I mean. Professor, I'm just a muggle wizard who just learned about the wizarding world. No, Richard, you are very smart. It should be said that you are very smart. If it is said that other little wizards may not know anything, but you are different. What you do is very purposeful, whether it is learning spells or you behavior to do things. Purpose? That word doesn't sound good. Compared to other wizards, I am more aware of what I lack and what I need, and then make plans based on these. Then what exactly do you want to do? Or what do you plan to do in the future? Richard knew it would be hard to get through the day without saying something. Professor Flitwick also asked me a few days ago. After my own experience these days and my understanding of the wizarding world, I just want to explore this world. To learn knowledge that I don't know. Of course I will first arm myself. After all, wizards, the world is still relatively dangerous. I must first ensure the safety of myself and the people I care about. These words were not only what Richard said to Dumbledore, but also his own real thoughts at the moment, but he didn't think about it on a deeper level. Then what do you think of Voldemort? Voldemort? He's just a stupid, pompous, racist loser, and he's dead. Nothing to look at. Dead? That's not certain. Although Voldemort failed, his strength is obvious to all, and it's hard to say whether he is dead or not. It doesn't matter to me whether he dies or not. He is too stupid. This is indeed what Richard said in his heart. Compared with Voldemort, the lover of the old bee, Grindelwald can be regarded as the real Dark Lord. Voldemort is more like, yes, a very powerful psychopath. And Harry? What do you think of Harry to the wizarding world? Harry Potter? What's wrong with him? A lucky but more pitiful child, bearing things that his age shouldn't bear. Such things as prophecies are nothing but good wishes of incompetent people. As for the wizarding world for Harry, it is as precious as light is for the blind. After speaking, Richard yawned. Dumbledore knew that tonight's conversation should be over. Although it didn't meet his expectations, it was okay for now. At least Richard should not become the henchman of the Dark Lord. Okay, Richard, go back. Before you go out, Harry fell asleep outside. Advertisement, by the way. Harry is still quite confused now. As his friend, can you give him some help at the right time? Of course, we are friends after all. Richard agreed casually, and then walked out of the principal's office. Meanwhile, Harry was still waiting pitifully at the door. Harry, why are you here? Didn't the professor tell you to go back first? I'm worried that you will be punished, so I want to wait here for you to come out, and then go together. How did the principal say anything? Don't worry, there is no punishment, it's just a casual chat. Let's go. After speaking, the two left and returned to their respective dormitories. Richard, who returned to the dormitory, carefully recalled the conversation with Dumbledore tonight. It was okay. At least Dumbledore should know that I am not Voldemort's gang. As long as this premise is agreed, Dumbledore will not care about him. As for Harry Potter, forget it, just go with the flow and help if you can, but you must not cause danger to yourself. Richard, who finally couldn't hold on at the thought, also fell asleep. At this moment, Dumbledore came to the room where the mirror of Eriste was placed, stared blankly at the mirror, and unconsciously called Ariana in a low voice. After a while, Dumbledore, who came back to his senses, calmed down, then took out his wand, and with some unknown spell, the image of Richard slowly appeared on the mirror. Does he really have nothing to desire? Taking a closer look, Dumbledore also spotted a grown Hermione in the corner. Is this Hermione Granger? But it seems that the age is different. Is it her sister? Dumbledore gradually showed a smile. It's nice to be young. It seems that Richard can rest assured. Thinking of this, Dumbledore cast a spell to put away the mirror of Eriste and left the room. The next day, when Richard got up, it was quite late. The school breakfast was over, and Richard didn't plan to eat any more candy after eating yesterday. It's next door to the Hufflepuff Lounge. After asking a few Hufflepuff students, Richard found out where the Hogwarts kitchens were located. Advertisement. After opening the door, there is a new world. There are dozens of house elves, all of whom are working. Some are cleaning the tableware in the morning, and some are preparing the dishes for noon. They were startled by Richard, who came in suddenly, and an elf who looked older came out. "Hello, my lord. What can I do for you?" "Don't be so polite. I didn't eat in the morning. Can I have a beef sandwich and a glass of milk?" "Okay, my lord. I'll prepare it for you as soon as you wait." After speaking, the elf bowed and retreated to the operating room. It didn't take long for Richard's meal to be ready, and an elf who seemed to be younger brought it over. Richard casually said thank you. Who knows? The house elf immediately ran back screaming. After a while, the table where Richard was sitting was covered with different kinds of food. Seeing that there was no room for anything on the table, little elves kept coming over with things. Others gave you things, and Richard must be grateful for the education of the Chinese Empire. Just like this, it traveled a circle. Richard said thank you, and the elf screamed and left, changing another one and doing it again. Richard knew that house elves were very servile, but he didn't expect it to be so serious. How would it end next? At this time, another house elf was about to come over with something, but was held back by the older one just now, and reprimanded loudly. "I'm really sorry, my lord, for causing you trouble." No, thank you." Hearing Richard's thanks, the old elf almost couldn't hold back, and walked back tremblingly. Chapter 23. With Richard reading books in the morning and practicing magic in the afternoon, the holiday soon came to an end, and the little wizards who went home for Christmas also returned to Hogwarts. After dinner for the whole school, Hermione brought Harry and Ronald to Ravenclaw's table. "Richard, we have a question for you. Do you know Nicholas May?" I asked Harry and Ronald to search the library on Christmas, but they found nothing. "Nicole May? This is a big figure in the alchemy world. Even many muggles know his name. Don't you know? But we searched all the famous wizards in modern times, but we couldn't find him." Richard looked at Hermione playfully, which made Hermione burn a little bit. "There is no him in modern times. Both he and his wife are over 600 years old. As for how long they can live, it depends on Nicholas May's great invention, the Philosopher's Stone." "The Philosopher's Stone? Is it the Philosopher's Stone that can make people live forever?" "Dumbledore seems to have him on his card." Ronald interrupted suddenly. Snape was going to steal the Sorcerer's Stone. It turned out that Snape's leg was injured on Halloween to steal the Sorcerer's Stone. He must have wanted to pass through the trapdoor guarded by Lu Wei and was bitten by Lu Wei. Harry suddenly seemed to think he said something like, "getting up." "Wait, what the hell are you talking about? Snape stealing the Philosopher's Stone?" After the three of Harry glanced at each other, Hermione spoke decisively. "Richard, you don't know. After our investigation during this period, Dumbledore has hidden a treasure in the school, but someone wants to steal this treasure. It should be Snape. He still cast a spell on Harry during the Quidditch match. We must protect this treasure." Richard saw the vowed trio, and was speechless for a while. Even if Snape wanted to steal this, what did it have to do with them? Just because Harry Potter was the savior. Besides, can't you tell the teacher, even if they don't trust others? But Dumbledore, you can tell Dumbledore. "That's right. It's so serious. Then you have to protect the treasure." As if they didn't hear Richard's perfunctory tone, the three of Harry were as high-spirited as if they had been beaten with blood. Instead of hanging out with the protagonist group, Richard still eats, sleeps, attends classes, and occasionally goes to the response room to practice magic. One afternoon after class, Hermione came to find Richard suddenly and asked Richard mysteriously, "Do you know dragons? Do you want to see dragons?" Advertisement with a thought. This is Hagrid's dragon egg about a hatch. Of course, I've always heard about dragons, but I've never seen them. But do you know where there are dragons? "I know. Come with me quickly." After speaking, Hermione took Richard to the gate of Hogwarts Castle, where Harry and Ronald were already waiting. "What are you doing? Where are the dragons?" Richard asked intentionally. "Shh. Don't talk. Follow us." After speaking, the three of Harry led Richard to Hagrid's hut. At this moment, Richard saw Malfoy not far away, staring at Harry silently. But Richard didn't tell the truth. After all, the trip to the Forbidden Forest depended on Malfoy's tip-off. Arriving at Hagrid's hut, Harry knocked on the door. After knocking on the door for a while, it opened slightly. "Harry, why are you here? I have something to do. Why don't you go back first?" Hagrid said. "We all know that Hagrid should be hatching today. Let us in quickly," Harry said hastily. "How do you know?" Hagrid asked in surprise. At this time, a group of people got in through the crack of the door. "Why is it so hot?" Everyone who entered the room felt a wave of heat coming over them. "Is it hot? I think it's a bit cold." So I turned on the fireplace more vigorously. Looking at Hagrid sweating profusely, everyone expressed their understanding. Suddenly, the iron barrel in the fireplace made a sound of thumping, and Hagrid hurried over, ignoring others, and took out an egg that was twice the size of an ostrich egg from the iron barrel. Richard and the three little ones rushed forward to watch. "Is this the dragon's egg?" "Yes, it's really big," Ronald said with emotion, quite a feeling that he wanted to write poems to the world, but he was uneducated. "Hello, Hagrid. How did you get this dragon egg? You know it's hard to get a dragon here." Richard winked at Hermione, "By the way, Hagrid, this is Richard, our friend." Harry introduced to Hagrid. Advertisement. "Hi, Richard. I won this dragon egg at poker while I was drinking. I don't know why. He seems to be eager to lose to me." "Did you say anything to him then?" Richard asked Hagrid guidingly. "It's nothing. He said he was afraid of the three-headed dog, and I told him that the three-headed dog will sleep as long as there is music." "Lu Wei." All three little ones shouted in shock. It must have been Snape. He wanted to know how to get through the trapdoor guarded by Lu Wei, and deliberately lost to you, Harry said. "What's Snape? What are you talking about?" Hagrid asked, puzzled. "It's Snape. He wants to steal the Sorcerer's Stone. So he used this dragon egg to tell you how to get through Lu Wei." "That's impossible. Snape is a professor at the school, and he's also one of the professors who guard the Philosopher's Stone. Listen, no one wants to steal anything, and this is Hogwarts. Dumbledore is here. No one can hide from Dumbledore's eyelid. Steal something." Harry was about to say something when the dragon egg began to shake non-stop. Everyone quickly shut up and stared at the dragon egg, but the dragon egg shook more and more violently, and suddenly the whole dragon egg burst, and a small dragon covered in mucus staggered out of its shell. "It's so beautiful, Nobo. Nobo, come quickly," Hagrid called affectionately. "I named it Nobo. How about it? It's not bad. You see, it must think I'm its mother." At this time, Xiaolong coughed a few times, and then spewed out a mouthful of dragon flame, which burned Hagrid's beard. Richard looked at Long Yin from the side, his eyes full of enthusiasm. "Hagrid, it's really beautiful. Can I keep silent about it?" Richard complimented against his will in order to be able to touch the little dragon. At this moment, Hagrid was like a mother showing off her child, holding Noble for Richard to touch, but Noble's struggle seemed somewhat powerless in front of the giant Hagrid. Richard carefully put his hand on Nobo's body. Chapter 24. A magical animal has been detected. The magical animal has been restrained and has no ability to resist. Do you want to start the extraction mode now? After thinking about it for a while, whether or not I will study it in the dormitory later, this time is very important. This extraction is being stored. The host is requested to complete the extraction within 24 hours. The extraction will be cancelled if the time limit is exceeded. Seeing that Richard was still stroking the little dragon, the three showed envious eyes, and just wanted to say something. "Who's there?" Hagrid said suddenly. Everyone looked towards the window, only to see a strand of golden hair flashing past the window. "It's Malfoy." The others all looked terrified. Only Richard's face was full of surprise. He could recognize this. It really is true love seeing that they had been discovered. Everyone hurried back to the dormitory in order to avoid any accidents. Richard, who returned to the dormitory, was excited and did not forget to take some precautionary measures, and then quickly lay back on the bed. Start the extraction silently in your mind. Storage extraction selection. Found the only storage extraction, juvenile Norwegian Ridgeback, 5 times. Whether to open, confirm to open. Whether to use autonomous extraction, don't use it first. See how your character is. If you can take it out, you can save it once. Random charge. A 1/5, random selection. Experience value plus 10 or 2/5, random selection. Experience value plus 10 or 3/5, random selection. Experience value plus 10 or 4/5, random selection. Advertisement experience value plus 10. Oh well, this is black and white. How can it be like this? Richard was already laughed out of anger. Enable automatic extraction. 1 Dragon's Breath 2. Wings of the Dragon 3. Power of Dragon 4. Dragon Magic Resistance 5. Experience value plus 10. Seeing these options, Richard was greedy. They were all so good. How to choose? Richard thought of the 4 consecutive experience just now. After thinking for a long time, Richard decided to choose Dragon's Breath. After all fears come from insufficient firepower. As long as the firepower is sufficient, everything will be fearless. After this selection, the picture book in my mind has changed. On the new page, the image of the Norwegian Ridgeback is displayed, and the ability acquisition and level are on the right. Now it is, Dragon Breath 0/5 can be upgraded. Dragon Wings, not drawn. Dragon Power, not drawn. Dragon Magic Resistance, not drawn. The current experience value of 112 is displayed at the top. Upgrade and upgrade, Don't say anything. Let's upgrade Dragon's Breath first. Richard silently recited the upgrade to the Dragon's Breath. Dragon's Breath 1/5, the remaining experience points are 12. I rub it. The first level needs 100 experience points, and I don't know how much is left. No time to think about these. Richard now just wants to see how this skill is. Where should I go to experiment? The only place I can go now is the response room. To be honest, the response room does not have much effect, but you can try how to use it first, and then it is best to see the effect. I recalled the plot in the Philosopher's Stone. The best time should be when I was in the Forbidden Forest, but I must go with other people. I can't go alone. If I meet someone I shouldn't, then that's Sigurd. Advertisement, don't think about it yet. Let's go to the room of requirement first. Done as he said, Richard quickly put on his clothes, carefully untied the security guard he had set up, and sneaked out of Ravenclaw's lounge. How could one not get wet shoes when standing by the river? Within a few minutes, Richard met a cat named Mrs. Norris. When Richard met Mrs. Norris at the beginning, Mrs. Norris didn't make any movement. She just sat quietly in the corner, licking her hair and looking at Richard jokingly. That's right, it was a joke. Richard saw the look of jokes in Mrs. Norris's cat eyes. This sixth child, even if he squatted in the corner, he still looked down on him. Richard was angry at that time. As soon as she pulled out her wand, Mrs. Norris began meowing nonstop. Filch's voice came to mind not too far away. Which little bee asterisk 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 D has been found again? Is it the damn Weasley brothers? Let me catch you this time. I will definitely let you try the torture equipment in my office. Richard was just about to cast a spell on Mrs. Norris, when suddenly two people came downstairs and pulled Richard and ran upstairs. Then they even got rid of Mrs. Norris under their skillful positioning. It can only be said that they are the king of Hogwarts Night Tour. Hi Richard, I'm Fred. He's George, Ronald's brother. We've heard Harry talk about you, that you should come to Gryffindor, and that Ronald is afraid of you, which is a relief to us. I'm Fred, and he's George, and it's pretty cool to hear Ronald say you've blown up a troll with polymorph, but we didn't see it. Before Richard could react, the Weasley brothers had already said a lot, and Richard couldn't get in at all. I just remember that they said that they would go out and continue to save the little wizard, and they couldn't let Filch catch anyone, except for Slytherin. Leave Ronald alone and play with him when you have time. In the end, they actually said that Richard inherited their Hogwarts, the talent of the king of mischievous night games. Hearing this, Richard laughed. He is the top student of Ravenclaw, and in a few years he will be an excellent graduate of Hogwarts, the future god of wizards. Mischief? Night tour? Don't get involved with anything weird. Finally, before the Weasley brothers left, I specifically said it to Richard. Don't release the spell in the corridor during the night tour. As long as you release the spell, you can detect it, unless you release it first in the dormitory. Hearing this, Richard finally understood why Filch was able to keep vigil at Hogwarts with a squib and capture so many little wizards. Fortunately, he knew, otherwise he would be in trouble if he was caught. In fact, Richard wanted to sneak out the Weasley brothers' Marauders map, but they helped him and taught him the experience of night travel, so I'm sorry to do it. The next step is to give priority to learning the illusion spell. After seeing the Weasley brothers leave, Richard also hurried out. Now that he knows that spells cannot be cast in the corridor, he is much more careful than before. Fortunately, I came to the room of requirement without any disturbance. Chapter 25. Arriving in the room of requirement, Richard summoned a training dummy as usual. Come to the first dummy. Shinfeng Wuying. The dummy was torn apart in an instant. Richard nodded, very satisfied with this power. Then in front of the second dummy, Richard called out Dragon's Breath. Then there was nothing and nothing happened. Although there was no one around, Richard still felt so embarrassed. Fortunately, he came to try it first. If he did it in front of others, it would be embarrassing. Richard quickly turned on the system in his mind to see what was wrong. After opening, Richard saw that the system has an additional loading option. After clicking in, there are 10 grids on the page, which are currently blank. There is a plus sign in the middle of the first grid, and a list of skills appears next to it when you click it. Now there is only one skill, which is Dragon's Breath. Richard quickly selected Dragon's Breath. Loading. Seeing that it was loading, Richard was a little flustered, but don't wait for 10 days and half a month. Fortunately, it loaded quickly. After loading, Richard had a very magical feeling, as if he was about to breathe, like blinking, and felt that there was another natural skill, which he should be able to release easily, and there was no spell at all. Looking at the dummy in front of him, Richard opened his mouth and spat out Long Yin, and just after vomiting, Richard stopped quickly. Looking at his curvy bangs, Richard was a little dazed. How could it be like this? After thinking for a while, Richard also thought of the reason. Longyan should not harm him, but the main reason is that the temperature is too high, and he does not have the physique of a dragon. It is a bit self-defeating to want to spray Longyan with his mouth. According to one's strength, if you want to use the most direct release, then you have to take out a dragon's body in the future. After thinking about it, Richard took out his wand. It is said that the wand is an extension of the wizard's magic power. Any spell can be used, so Longyan should also be able to do it. Richard closed his mouth tightly, held the wand and released dragon flames at the dummy, and saw a large amount of flames sprayed out from the top of the wand. In about 10 seconds, Richard felt very tired and stopped quickly. After Longyan stopped, the dummy had turned into fly ash and dissipated into the air. After sitting on the ground, Richard felt as if one of his bodies had been hollowed out, and he didn't feel tired mentally. It was the complete opposite of the connection spell. It seemed that these abilities consumed physical energy. After sitting for a while, the physical exhaustion did not ease, and a sense of hunger slowly surged up, and it seemed to be getting worse. Richard knew that he had to eat something immediately, otherwise such a strong hunger would not matter whether it was physical or mental. It did him a lot of damage. Advertisement stumbling out of the room of requirement. Richard had no time to worry about Filch. If he dared to come out to find trouble at this time, Richard would definitely give him a shot. Fortunately, there were no disturbances on the road of Richard's self-salvation, and Richard happened to have been to the Hogwarts kitchen, so he arrived very smoothly. Richard pushed open the kitchen door with all his strength and collapsed to the ground. The sudden arrival of Richard will jump the elf who is still in the kitchen. "Quick, give me something to eat. I'm starving to death," Richard said tremblingly in a weak tone. Seeing that they were students from Hogwarts, the house elf also reacted and quickly brought some food over. When Richard saw the food, his eyes gleamed, and now he grabbed it and ate it as if he was dying just now. While eating, he saw the house elf just now and seemed to be looking forward to something. Richard hurriedly said thank you. The elf was thanked by Richard, and while beating his head, he shouted. The old man who said thank you last time came again. Well, within a few minutes, a bunch of house elves rushed over, each carrying different food. Seeing this situation, Richard quickly said, as long as the meat and water are not required. A few elves carrying meat rushed over quickly, and the rest brought the food back annoyed. After adding enough food, Richard finally recovered. Thinking of the situation just now, Richard couldn't help sweating down his back. It was too dangerous. This damn old sick system wants to get rid of the host and replace it with someone else, almost bye-bye. The more he thought about it, the more angry Richard walked out of the kitchen with his waist and stomach straight, followed by a row of bowing house elves. There is one thing to say, the house elf is really easy to use. There is no way now, and I must get one to take home in the future. Richard, who is like a pregnant woman, has come to a crossroads in his life. Advertisement: do you want to go back to the dormitory? No, I'm too full now. I don't want to sleep after going back to the night. Thinking of this, Richard climbed upstairs with difficulty. The room of response is on the 8th floor, and the kitchen is in the basement. The mushrooms are blue and thin. Panting heavily, Richard finally returned to the room of requirement. Now I'm tired and exhausted. How could such a nice and talented boy like me do this? An urge to cry welled up in my heart. After finally breathing evenly, Richard released the dragon's breath carefully. Gradually the satiety became lower and finally returned to a normal level. Then Richard didn't dare to continue to try. It seems that the physique must also be included in the improvement plan, and he can't face the disappointed eyes of many beauties later because of magic. After Richard left the room of requirement, he returned to the dormitory contentedly. Now it seems that the damage of the 2-level dragon's breath is no worse than that of Shinfeng Wuying. Doesn't the 3rd, 4th, or even the legendary 5th level have to go to heaven? All that's left is to plan and plan well. Do you want to go to the Forbidden Forest to see it? Richard still didn't think about this point. After all, he was going to face Voldemort now. Even though it was a dilapidated Voldemort, it still made people feel guilty. This is not reading a book or watching a movie, otherwise you will die. However, judging from the original plot, it should be impossible to die, and you can even touch a unicorn. In the end, Richard decided to be reckless. After all, unicorns should be difficult to come across in the short term, and the dragon's breath also added weight to Richard's determination. After confirming his participation, Richard fell asleep beautifully. In the dream, Richard seemed to be transformed into a dragon, releasing the 5th-level dragon flames at will. Dumbledore and Voldemort bowed their heads, and the entire wizarding world trembled in his shadow.
Thanks for watching. You can find the next videos in the playlist linked in the info card, directly on my channel, or right here on the screen. And as always, if you have any feedback, feel free to share it in the comments too.